I knocked twice on my own door before I opened it. That was the rule. The storeroom they gave me to sleep in opened straight onto the room where they ate, and Roland did not like being surprised. "They're finished," I told them. "I'll lend each of you your skills. Take them." Then I did the thing that made the Silver Blades an S-rank party, and not one of them looked up from their plates while I did it. I lent them their power. 12 skills, learned overnight, passed one by one from my hands into theirs. A Blade Edge for Roland, a Ward for Gordon, fast-chant for Elena, a Mending Light for Tina. I had ground each of them out of nothing in a single night, and I gave every last one away, and I kept nothing back for myself. That is the part they never understood, so I will say it plainly. The famous swords of the famous party were mine, all of them. My own skill is called Skill Loan, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It lets me hand the abilities I have trained to someone else. While they carry them, I go empty. The heroes people sang about were carrying my work and calling it their birthright. There is a system to how skills are earned. You train, and the effort collects like water filling a jar one drop at a time. And when it crosses a certain line, the skill wakes up, and you can use it. Most people spend years filling one jar. I fill 12 in a night and pour them all into other men's hands. I have a gift for the learning that nobody in 7 years ever thought worth mentioning out loud. Roland brought me into the Silver Blades himself back when we were younger, and he still remembered we had been something like friends. We were both born with a unique skill, one of the rare ones that only ever wake in a child. And once, that had meant we were the same kind of person. He had forgotten that. Somewhere across 3 years, he had rewritten the story so that the strength was his and the burden was me. Nobody thanked me. Gordon told me I had made them wait. Elena did not speak to me at all. I had heard the rest of it the night before, through the wall. The storeroom walls were thin enough to carry every word, which tells you something about the room and something about me. They had been talking about how slow I was, how I dragged the whole party down. Roland floated the idea, easy as ordering breakfast, of throwing me out. They had not always been like this. 3 years ago, the Silver Blades cleared an A-rank dungeon, and the truth is, an earthquake shook the boss loose for them, and they walked into a win they had not earned. After that, they stopped listening to me. After that, the respect they had for me quietly went bad, the way meat does, from the inside, where you cannot see it until you open the door. I lay in the dark and listened and did not knock on the wall. I did the only thing a man in my position could do that would change anything. I decided to leave. After the next dungeon, I would walk out, leave every lent skill behind me, take the small share owed me, and go. That was the plan. It was a small plan. It got bigger by the end of the day. They had eaten before they thought to call me, so my supper waiting from the night before, which was also my breakfast, was the soup gone cold with bread, 4 days stale drowning at the bottom of it. I ate it anyway, standing. Sitting would have meant staying, and I was done staying. Behind the door, they were laughing about a dungeon they only survived because of what I had lent them. I did the arithmetic instead of getting angry. That is the one thing I want you to understand about me before any of it starts. Anger is loud and cheap. A man who is angry warns you. Interest is quiet, and it compounds, and it does not warn you at all. I had lent skills to these 4 for years. Every loan ran on the same terms, the terms nobody ever bothered to read, because who reads the fine print handed to them by the man they feed stale bread? 10% every 10 days. I finished the soup. I did not do the full sum yet. I did not have to. I already knew the shape of it. The next dungeon was the Demon's Descent. I told myself it would be my last run with them. I was right, though not for the reason I thought. The Demon's Descent is called the deadliest dungeon still open. Strong men go down into it and do not come back up, and the ones who do come back pass down which skills keep a person breathing on which floor. It is not a place you enter without a good reason. Roland's good reason was the reward at the bottom. On the fungus floor, Roland woke Sword Saint and cut a path through the monsters faster than the eye could hold. His blade lit up when the skill came alive. It was a beautiful thing to watch, and it was mine. And he warned me over his shoulder to stay flat on the ground, or he would cut me down with the rest of them. I stayed flat. When it was over, he walked back and kicked me where I lay, and told the others I was too slow and too filthy to be worth the bags I carried. Gordon kept his distance and laughed at how badly I flinched. Tina said it was a little pitiful to talk to me that way, and then reminded them that the loan only worked while I stayed close, so they had better not send me too far off. That was the closest thing to kindness I got, a reminder that the tool should be kept in reach. Here is what none of them knew, crouched there in the muck. The whole floor was poisoned. The fungus breathed it, the traps leaked it, and the air we stood in was slowly killing anyone in it. The men who survived this dungeon before us passed down which skills a person needs to breathe on which floor, and I was the only one in the party who had actually listened. They were not dying, and the only reason was a skill I had lent them, a resistance running quiet through every one of them, keeping their own lungs from turning against them. And skill alone has a range. It thins with distance, and then it dies. I measured it in my head, while Roland sneered down at me. 3 steps. If I stood up and walked 3 steps farther back than I already was, the resistance would stretch past its limit and snap, and the 4 geniuses of the Silver Blades would drown standing up on dry land with their own lungs. I knew it the way you know your own name, and I stayed where I was, and I said nothing, and I let them live one more time. Complaining only ever made the bread older. I had learned that lesson so well it had worn smooth, but I want you to hold on to that number. 3 steps. It matters later, more than once. At a fork in the path, Roland stopped and turned it into my fault. He said I had never explained the scout's instinct skill to him, so he did not know which branch to take. I had explained it. I remembered explaining it. It did not matter. I apologized, said the mistake was mine, and he docked my share for it anyway, the way he had been docking it for years, until whatever they owed me had shrunk to less than a tenth and kept shrinking. I apologized because apologizing was cheaper than being right. That was the math I had lived by for 7 years in this party. Swallow it. Keep the peace. Keep the bread from getting any older. I told myself, walking the right-hand branch behind them, that maybe Roland's mood would soften by the time we climbed back into daylight. Even then, even that late, some worn-out part of me was still hoping for that. The right-hand branch ended at a door. It was a huge slab of stone with a dragon carved into it, coiled across the whole face of the door. The boss room, the thing at the bottom of the deadliest dungeon in the world, lived on the other side of it. Roland told me to go in first, not with them, ahead of them, alone into the boss room, to buy them a few seconds and die doing it. He said it the way he ordered me to carry the bags. I said it back to him plainly, so there would be no pretending later. He wanted me to walk into the boss room first and die, and I told him I understood why. Guild Rule 17. When a member leaves a party, the party owes him severance, scaled to his years of service. 7 years of my service is not a small number, but a dead man is owed nothing. If I quit, they paid. If I died in a dungeon, they walked away clean. Roland did not flinch when I laid it out. He confirmed it. I was a debt to him now, a line in a ledger he wanted crossed off, and a first-class alchemist would be sitting in my chair inside 2 weeks. That was all I had ever been to him at the end, a number he wanted to stop paying. I looked at the other 3. I asked them, one at a time, if they agreed with it. Gordon said it was the leader's call, and that settled it for him. Elena said only that she agreed. Tina said she had been against it, and then said it was a majority decision, which is the sentence people use when they want the guilt of objecting and the safety of going along. She was outvoted. She let herself be outvoted. So I said yes. I did not beg. I did not reach for a weapon I did not have. I told them, calm as reading a receipt, that I would go. And then I asked for one thing first before I went through the door. Give me back the skills I lent you. I made it sound like nothing. I told them that if I died down here, the loans went void anyway, worthless, so they lost nothing by handing them back. And this way, I could at least soften the boss up before it finished me. Let the dead weight be useful one final time. Roland found that funny. He scoffed that even with every skill I owned returned to me, I could not put a scratch on the thing behind that door, that I should stop dreaming, that he would humor a dead man his last wish. He waved a hand and told the others to give them back. I spoke the word that runs the skill, return, and one by one, out loud, each of them agreed to return what they had borrowed. Gordon said it while he stripped my gear off me, tossing my bags aside, telling me they had already run the numbers the day they decided to be rid of me, that they were far past the level where a man like me could touch them. Elena said it, Tina said it, and then murmured a prayer for the soul of a man not blessed with talent, and asked me to go peacefully. They agreed. That was all I had ever needed. Skill loan cannot take back what is not freely returned. Their contempt was the one thing that made them careless enough to give consent without reading the terms. I did not take the skills. They handed them to me. A calm voice spoke then, a woman's voice, level and unhurried, the assisting voice that had spoken only to me for as long as I had held this skill. It said the repayment had been approved and was beginning. And this time, this was the small thing that changed everything. This time, the others could hear it too. I warned them about the interest. Fairly. 10%, I said, every 10 days. Elena's eyes were the deep blue of the ancient wisdom skill she carried, and I watched those eyes go to work. She ran it in her head as simple interest, 6 years, a little over 210-day stretches, and came out somewhere around 22,000 skill points owed. She almost looked relieved. 22,000 was nothing to a party like theirs, nothing to fear. Then I told her it was compound, not simple. I watched the number come apart behind her face. Compound folds the interest back into what is owed over and over, so it does not climb a slope, it falls off a cliff going the other way. 6 years on the oldest loan, more than 200 turns of the 10-day wheel, each one landing on the last, each one heavier than the one before. The little sum she had been so relieved by, that tidy 22,000, was the number you get from the wrong arithmetic. The true figure did not have a comfortable size. It had no size a person could hold in their head at all. Her fast-chant skill alone was worth over 1,000,000 points, and that was one debt out of 4, the smallest thread in a rope that was about to pull tight around all of them. Her mouth opened. The blue drained out of her face faster than it drained out of her eyes. She got as far as the start of a single word, half of a warning she would never finish handing to the others, the beginning of telling them to stop. And it was already, by any measure that mattered, far too late. Gordon shoved me toward the widening door. Roland kicked me through it. As the dragon-carved stone swung shut between us, I found Elena's blue eyes through the last of the gap, and I did not say it out loud. I only shaped the words with my mouth, for her, so she would carry them. It's already too late. Then the door sealed, cold, and cut me off from every face I had spent 7 years lending my life to. I stood alone in the dark. Somewhere ahead of me in that black room was the boss of the deadliest dungeon in the world, and I felt no fear of it at all. That should tell you something. A man who is being sacrificed is afraid. I was not being sacrificed. I was collecting, and the collection had a sound, and I could hear it starting on the other side of the stone. The calm voice went on, speaking, muffled through a foot of rock, and it was speaking to all of them now, not only to me. It confirmed the process was complete. It began to name what was coming back to me. The first skill out was Hawk's Eye, the borrowed sight Roland had leaned on for years and never once said aloud. The eyes he had used to find the path he then blamed me for losing. Debtor, Roland. And then, level and unhurried as ever, the voice set the effective rate on the whole of it, the rate that had been sleeping in every loan I ever made them. The fine print none of them read, because reading it would have meant looking at me, over 116 billion%. I let the number sit in the dark with me a moment. It is not a figure a debt is meant to survive. It is the size of an avalanche written down. Outside that door, 4 people who had run their numbers and decided I was worth less than a severance fee were about to learn what their real numbers were. They had taken my years for free. The collection was beginning. The stone door boomed shut behind me, and the dark swallowed the last of their laughter. Then the collection began. 4 skills came home at once. Not the way a borrowed coat comes back folded and clean. They came back the way a river comes back through a broken dam. Roland stole in sight first, and 3 more behind it, each one dragging 6 years of compound interest at over 116 billion%, all of it slamming into a single skull. It felt like being struck by a falling tower. My knees went. Something behind my eyes tore. For one white second, I understood that a normal man, taking this much power back this fast, does not survive it. His brain simply comes apart. I would have died there in the mud, on the far side of my own victory. Except I did not. Right at the edge, where the pain stopped being pain and started being an ending, something in me caught me. My unique skill has a safety on it, the way a good tool has a guard. When the body is about to be destroyed, it lifts the mind out and sets it somewhere safe to be mended. So the world of stone and dark folded away, and I was somewhere else. Everything was white. No floor I could name, no ceiling, no cold. The screaming had stopped. Somewhere far below, I understood, my ruined body was being rebuilt by the healing I had reclaimed along with everything else, knit back cell by cell, while I waited here where it could not hurt me. And I was not alone. There was a voice, calm even, a young woman's, the same voice that had steadied my hand on 100 quiet jobs when no one else was listening. Only now it was not narrating my skills. It was talking to me. She told me she had been watching over me, not from far off, from closer than anyone had ever been, from behind my own eyes, all these years, through every cold supper and every insult through a wall. I stood in that white place and let that land. Someone had seen. After all that time of being the man nobody counted, someone had been counting the whole while. "Thank you for watching over me," I said. It was not a large thing to say. It was the largest thing I had said in years. She answered that the time taken from me would come back now as an honest strength, that this was what she had wanted for me. I asked her the plain question. "What's your name?" "Echo," she said. I turned it over once. Short, easy in the mouth, nothing hidden in it. "That's a good name," I told her. And I meant it. She said the mending was nearly done. I could feel it, the pull of the true world coming back up under me like the floor of a rising cage. But before I went back down, the collection reached the others. I did not see it happen. I only pieced it together after, the way you piece together a good sum. But I know how it went because I know exactly what I took back. Every skill keeping the silver blades on their feet down there had been mine. The strength in Roland's arm, the sight in his eye, the wards on Gordon's plate, the resistance holding back a whole floor of poison that should have dropped them in minutes. All loaned, all, in that instant, called home. So it caught them mid-argument. Elena felt it first, the way she felt everything first. She had gone pale and started begging them to open the door and finish me now, this second, before the numbers finished them. Roland waved her off. Why rush, he reckoned. The boss would handle the dead weight soon enough. Gordon told her she was clever, but the world still ran on common sense. Then the strength went out of them like water out of a cracked jug. Gordon dropped first, all that plate and muscle folding into the mud with nothing underneath it. Tina went down beside him, mid-word. Elena tried to say one more thing, and the poison she no longer had any guard against took the breath right out of it, and she sank too. Roland was the last to fall. The great leader, the celebrated blade, the man who had docked my pay and thrown me through a door to save himself a severance fee. He looked around at 3 collapsed bodies with an expression I would have paid to see, and then his own borrowed legs quit under him, and the mud took him too. 4 people who had run their numbers and decided I was worth less than a fee, laid out in a row in the dark, breathing the poison they had only ever survived on my account. I felt no heat about it. Anger is loud and cheap. I just noted the figures and let them settle. The first installment, paid. I woke on cold marble. The white space let me go, and I came to in a throne room the size of a cathedral, carved stone underfoot. The only light a scatter of glowing rocks in the walls. My body was whole, better than whole. I took stock, and I nearly laughed. Every skill I had reclaimed had not just come back, it had grown. All those billions of points, poured into things that had been ordinary, had pushed them clean over into something new. My old slashing skill now cut space itself. My sight had become a divine perception that read the room to its corners. My strength had unfolded into the 6-fold arms, a set of unseen hands. My tired old palm technique was the all-reaching palm now, and every poison resistance I owned had come home to sit under all of it like bedrock, which was fortunate because I was not alone in the cathedral. My perception found it coiled around the far throne, white, immense, a serpent dragon the length of a street, breathing a slow mist of poison out of its own pale hide. The pale worm, I knew the name. Everyone knew the name. The thing the world calls unkillable, by blade, by fist, by magic, by miracle, by day or by night. The whole dungeon above me suddenly made sense as one long design, a corridor of poison built to funnel brave fools straight down to a guardian that could not be made to die. Echo's voice came sharp in my head, warning me this was a hostile creature of the very highest danger. "It's fine," I told her. Then I went to work, not to win yet, but to learn. It struck without a sound. Faster than sound, a white blur off the throne, jaws wide enough to take me whole. I was not there. Space Leap put me 6 paces left before the bite closed on empty air. Its tail came around behind me, a wall of muscle moving quicker than any tail that size had a right to. This time, I did not dodge. I caught it. The 6-fold arms took hold of a supersonic dragon in 6 unseen hands, and I threw the thing back down its own throne room like a sack of grain. It hit the wall, and it was up again before the dust moved. Not a mark on it. Good. Now I knew. Evolved or not, my ordinary skills would push this creature around all day and never once hurt it. Reputation confirmed. To kill a thing that cannot be killed, I would have to stop playing by the rules that made it so. So I turned to the next stage of the collection. The debt I was owed did not stop at reclaimed skills. It let me reach past a loan and seize the skill points of a unique skill outright, and one of those was still owed to me. I called it in. My mind nearly tore for the second time in a single day, that same white edge. and I wrote it down. A unique skill came apart in my hands and reformed as something older, the God Age hymn, a power that reaches all the way back into the magic of the ancient human age before anyone living and hands you spells the modern world forgot. Every other skill I held dropped to the floor to pay for it, the points running down past nothing, close to $1 billion in the red. Cheap for what it bought. Borrow and repay, I said. That's only right. Then I opened the hymn and pulled a spell up out of the deep past, an ancient deep frost, a cold from a colder age. The worm came for me again. I did not move this time either. I chained it clean, the way a great teacher once taught me to bind skills into one act. Chant rejection, so the ancient spell needed no long singing. An endless spring of mana to feed it, a tear in space to carry it. And then the cold went out of me in a single shattering blade of frost and took the pale worm full on. The undying dragon froze solid in an instant. All that immortal length turned to white glass in the air, and I broke it. Not into 2, not into 10, into hundreds of frozen pieces, scattered across 7 dimensions at once. I picked up one shard, a single fang, and felt the life still humming inside it even now. Frozen for 1,000 years, this thing still would not be dead. 2,000 before it could ever come back whole. That was the measure of what I had just beaten, so I made sure it never would. I widened Space Leap through the all-reaching palm until my reach ran clear past the ceiling, past the dungeon, past the blue of the sky itself, out to the star ocean, that endless black beyond the world, and I threw every last frozen piece of the pale worm out into it, flung them across the dark, where no current would ever gather them back into one shape again. The unkillable thing was not dead. I had done something quieter and worse. I had put it somewhere it could never return from. I kept the one fang. A collector keeps his receipts. The dungeon knew its master was gone. With the worm scattered, the whole place began to come down, stone groaning, the poison mist thinning as the traps went dead. A cleared dungeon leaves its rewards behind, minerals and treasure for the guild to log, and I would see to that. My mind was already up above, on the guild report, on the poisoned party lying in the mud, when my perception caught one thing more. Something was still alive in the chamber. I found it resting where the throne had been, an egg, smooth, white, glossy, the size of a full armful. The pale worm's egg, left behind by the thing I had just cast beyond the sky. Echo spoke up, gentle but plain. Break it, she suggested, before it can ever hatch. Finish the line here. I thought about it. An immortal creature, raised from the shell, could be a mighty ally, or mishandled, a fresh disaster with a 2,000-year memory. I stood in the falling dust and made my choice. I'll raise it, I said. Any objection? Only a worm can ever truly answer a worm, and I had a feeling I would want an answer one day. Echo went quiet, then said, softly, that she had none. Only respect, and a curiosity about how I decide. It caught me off guard, that respect, more than the fight had. Then, absurdly, some cooking skill buried in my long list woke up and cheerfully began to treat the armful of dragon egg as an ingredient. Thanks for worrying, I said, but cancel that, quickly. I shut it down before it could get any ideas. Egg under one arm, fang in my pack, I climbed for the light. I came up out of the dark and stood under open sky, blue, all of it, edge to edge, no ceiling, no walls, no stone door. I had gone into that town a borrowed man years ago, and I had never once stood out here as anything but their tool. Now I stood here owing no one. My clear reward was collected. My severance was paid out. My withdrawal from the Silver Blades was logged clean at the guild. Every tie cut on paper the way I like things cut. Behind and below me, a mining crew would find 4 bodies in the mud and haul them up. And that was the town's problem now, not mine. I sat down in the grass, unhurried, and ate a bowl of warm soup. Warm, this time. I had earned the difference. For the first time I could remember, nothing was waiting on the other side of a door. There was one thing left I wanted to do before the road. I had a voice that had watched over me for years from behind my own eyes, and I had never once been able to do anything for her in return. A man who can only ever borrow is not free. A man who can give is. So I decided to give. I'm going to give you a body now, I told the air. She misread me at once, wondering, a little flustered, whether I was trying to make myself a wife. I set that straight. No, it's not that. It was gratitude, nothing more. But when I pressed her, she admitted the truth of it, quietly. That yes, she did wish to touch the world with her own 2 hands. That was enough for me. The logic was simple. If a mind can be lifted out and set somewhere safe, then a vessel can be shaped to hold one. I called in my second seized claim, took the healing skill that had once been Tina's, and pushed it over the edge the same way I had the rest. It evolved into Seraph's blessing, a healing grown so far past mending that it could build. So I built. I shaped a body out of light and settled Echo's mind into it, and the voice that had lived behind my eyes opened a pair of its own. She stood in the field in front of me, real, long silver hair, eyes the warm amber of afternoon sun, pale, and still a touch unearthly at the edges, as if the world had not finished agreeing she was in it. She turned her new hands over and felt sunlight land on skin for the first time. Then she asked her 2 questions, both of them flatly practical, which told me exactly how her mind ran. First, now that she was truly here, what should she call me? We went around on it. I offered my plain name. She wanted something with more weight. We settled, over my mild objection, on Master. Fine, decided. Her second question was simpler. She had no clothes. My healing had regrown a body, but it could not conjure garments that had never existed to regrow. So I gave her the shirt off my own back, cinched the oversized fit with a length of cord, and folded the sleeves back twice. And that was that. We stood up together, the dragon egg shouldered in my bag, our one precious thing. I was done with tangled town ties. I wanted to be no one for a while, somewhere far off where nobody knew our faces, a quiet place to raise a dragon. Inwardly, I did the last of the arithmetic. Of the 4 unique skills the silver blades had held, 2 were mine now. 2 were still out there, sleeping in the hands of men lying senseless in the mud. Men who would wake one day and come looking for what I had taken. Let them. I would be a long way west by then. Echo asked which foot to lead with. I told her the right, and we took the first step together, out from under everything that had ever owned me, into open sky. The fat man had a bag of coin pressed to his chest like a child holding a stolen toy, and I let him hold it while I told him why I had come. You never paid that girl what you promised her, I said. He started in on the excuses before I finished the sentence. She was Wolfkin. No law in the province made a man pay a beast the way he paid people. The arrangement had been his to set, and he had set it. I had heard the shape of that argument long before he opened his mouth, so I did not bother to answer it. This is a collection. I kept my voice where I keep the numbers. I have come to take back the profit you squeezed out of her. Do not resist, and you keep your life. Resist, and we will do the arithmetic the hard way. That was when he found his courage, the way small men do when they think the law is a wall at their back. He screamed that the money was his, that I was nobody, that he would see me hanged for laying a hand on an honest merchant. I raised my right hand toward his face. Activate. 4 days before I stood in that room, none of it had begun yet. Echo walked the road on her own 2 feet now, and still watched them like they might betray her. 4 days on the ground and she had stopped stumbling. She had not stopped being delighted by it. She asked whose land this was, so I told her. The whole stretch belonged to the Ashford line, cautious nobles, the intellectual kind who would rather solve a problem than fight it. Their founder had been a second prince who slipped a succession war by asking for the worst, most war-scarred corner of the map, then quietly making it worth having. They raised small lodging towns at the crossing points to pull in trade, and taxed the trade that came. So the man we are going to meet keeps peace by being too clever to need a sword, Echo said. Something like that. She looked back the way we had come, at the low heap on the horizon we had walked past at dawn, near 80 monster corpses, piled in a single night. Walking Dead, poison boars, a few night hounds, all of them dead before they reached the road. You realize how we look, she said. 2 clean travelers, well rested, and a mountain of bodies behind us that we did not so much as glance at. In this world, if a man goes about looking respectable, the corpses simply stack up at his back. She said it dryly, and she was not wrong. I had left a few skills seated along the road as standing defenses. A loaned edge here, a leap there. The duration held open so they would trip on their own the instant anything came hunting us in the dark. 80 things had come hunting. 80 things had tripped. I told her as much, and she said my inventiveness kept surprising her, which from Echo counted as high praise. Then the road bent, and the roofs of Milford came up out of the grass. Milford held maybe 100 souls, and every one of them wore the same tired face. It was a town built to feed a road, and roads do not care how the people feeding them are doing. I saw her before Echo did. A girl, young, flaxen-haired, with a wolf's ears standing up through that hair and a wolf's tail hanging low behind her. Her clothes were rags in the plain sense of the word. Cloth worn past cloth, barely holding the shape of clothes. She stood a little apart from the townsfolk, the way a person stands when they have learned that being close to others only invites a shove. Nobody looked at her. That was the part I noticed, not the cruelty of a crowd staring. The worst thing, a crowd that had decided she was not there. I knew that exact arrangement of being unseen. I had lived inside it for 3 years. Master, Echo said quietly, you have gone still. I am fine, I told her. Let us find the labor yard. The wolf girl worked in the yard, and the work was killing her by inches. The wheat sacks were stacked twice the height of a grown man, and she carried them one at a time from the pile to the storehouse door, staggering under each one, her thin legs shaking on every trip. A foreman leaned in the shade and barked at her to stop dawdling, calling her a worthless skill dog when she slowed. At midday, they fed her. I watched the meal come out, and something in me went cold and quiet. Thin soup and bread gone stale to the point of stone, dropped in front of her like scraps for an animal. It was the same supper the silver blades used to set in front of me, 4 days old and drowning, after they had already eaten. I had told myself for years that I did not remember it. I remembered every bite. You could help her, Echo said, watching my face. If I may be so bold, master, you keep hunting for the reason it would be wrong. Whether you help her out of pity, or to see yourself as good, or for no clean reason at all, the girl in front of you is still fed at the end of it. Do not fear the hypocrisy. Fear letting her starve while you weigh it. She was right. She usually is. I put the numbers together first. The hauling contract paid 3,000 silver coins to move every sack to the storehouse, a job that ran 3 or 4 days. Out of that, 300 silver was docked each day for the food they threw at her. Stretch a job like that long enough, and the meals eat the wage down to nothing. That was the trap, and it was an ordinary one. So I went to her, and I did not offer her charity, because I had already seen the way she held her chin. Your pay is 3,000 silver coins, I said. Give me 600 of it. Her head came up. What did you just say? Give me 600, and I will show you how to earn 10 times what this job will ever leave in your hand. Hear me out, and then decide. She looked at me the way a starving dog looks at an open palm, wanting it, certain it hides a stick. But she did not walk away. She listened. She told me her skill before she told me her name. Leg strength, a burst of speed and power in the legs, the kind of gift that should have made this job easy. It does not even last 10 seconds, she said, flat, daring me to laugh. 10 seconds, and then it is gone, and I am just a girl carrying sacks. If I do not finish early, you get nothing. I agree to your terms, I said. You only pay me if I am right. Then I did the math out loud, because a proud person will not take a gift, but will always take a deal that is plainly good. Finish the job in 1 day instead of 4, and the meal deduction is taken once instead of 4 times. Everything the trap would have swallowed, she keeps. Even after my 600, she walks away with more silver than 4 days of this would ever have left her. I watched her follow the arithmetic to the end and find no lie in it. And how, she said slowly. Do I finish 4 days of work in one? That was Echo's part. Through her, I opened skill loan and lent the girl a piece of my own duration. Duration enhancement, drawn down from the far greater version I carry, Starfrost. Her 10 seconds of leg strength stopped being 10 seconds. It became as long as she needed it to be. She felt it land in her legs and went rigid, staring at her own hands like they belonged to someone stronger. Before she could decide the whole thing was a trick, I bought a plain-baked pastry from a stall at the yard's edge and put it in her hand. An investor looks after what he has invested in, I said. Eat. You have a long afternoon. She ate it in 4 bites, watching me the entire time, and I understood we had a deal. Her name, she finally admitted around the last mouthful, was Hazel. Then Hazel ran. That is the only word for it. With her leg strength holding open and no 10-second wall to slam into, she took sacks half again her own weight and moved like the weight was a rumor. Pile to storehouse, storehouse to pile, faster than the foreman could find a reason to bark. The chaff hung gold in the low sun, and she cut through it again and again, her tail streaming flat behind her. That shaking exhaustion of the morning burned clean off her. The foreman stopped barking. He stood in the shade with his mouth slightly open, watching a worthless skill dog do 4 days of labor before his supper cooled. Echo laughed once, delighted. I did not laugh, but I will admit it was a good thing to watch. The girl the whole town had agreed not to see, outworking every clean-handed soul in it while the sun went down. By the time the light went red, she had cleared the last sack, every one of them, stacked neat inside the storehouse door. A 4-day job, done between one meal and the dark. She came to me, still breathing hard, and she paid me 600 silver coins, counted into my hand exactly as promised, not a coin short. A wolf, I would learn, never forgets a debt, and pride will not let one go unsettled. It was a clean win. She had earned it herself. I had only lent her the time to do it, and yet when she turned to go, there was something wrong in her face. Not triumph, not even relief, something closer to dread. quickly hidden. I told myself it was only how tired she was. That was the mistake. I knew it was a mistake even as I made it, and I let it stand. We found her the next morning, and she was still in rags. That was the first thing that did not fit. A girl who had cleared a 3,000 silver contract the day before crouched at the edge of the market in the same worn scraps, scooping something out of a puddle of muddy water with her bare hands and eating it fast, the way you eat when you do not want to be seen eating. She saw us. She bolted, up and gone before I could say her name, shame moving faster than her leg strength ever had. Echo crouched at the puddle and lifted a scrap of the chopped root out of the water, red-flowered, pale at the root. "That is rot hand grass," she said. "The root is food, but only after it is scrubbed clean in fresh water. Eaten like this, straight from the mud, it is poison." She was eating poison out of a puddle. I heard my own voice go flat. The morning after she earned 3,000 silver. "It makes no sense, master. She was paid less than a day ago." But it did make sense. It made a cold, ugly kind of sense, and the shape of it was already coming clear. She had paid me my 600. She should have kept far more. Instead, she was on her knees in the mud, eating something that could kill her. Somewhere between the storehouse and this morning, the money had gone. Not spent, taken. I had lent her the strength to earn a wage, and someone had reached in and stolen it out of her hands before she ever closed them. I told Echo to go after her, keep her in sight, keep her alive. Then I went to find the man who kept the ledger. Gerald was fat and comfortable and entirely willing to explain his work, because a man that pleased with himself cannot imagine anyone judging it. I asked him what he had paid the wolf girl for the hauling. He told me, cheerfully, that he had paid her in full, 600 silver coins. When I said the contract was 3,000, he laughed and asked whether I honestly thought a man handed 3,000 silver to a wolfkin and still called it business. Then he walked me through it, proud as a craftsman showing off a joint. You write the job as 4 days, even when it takes one. You dock 300 a day for meals against the days on paper, not the days worked. You add a fee for every sack you decide was damaged. Layer the deductions high enough, and 3,000 becomes 600, and the law never once has to be broken, because the numbers were always his to write. 600, the exact 600 she had counted into my hand. She had paid me her entire stolen wage and kept nothing at all, and then gone out and knelt in the mud. I stood there and listened to a full-grown man rob a starving child and laugh about it, and something I had carried for 3 years finally came apart and showed me its inside. He was not doing it for the money. 600 silver meant nothing to a man like this. He was doing it because he could not stand to pay a wolfkin fairly and still think of himself as what he thought he was. His standing mattered more than his purse. His pride was worth more to him than being right, or being decent, or making sense. And there it was. That was the thing I had never been able to solve. Roland and the others had marched me into a monster's mouth to save a fee they could have paid 10 times over. I had spent years trying to find the profit in it, the cold reason, and there had never been one. It was this. It was exactly this. Not gain, not logic, pride, and the picture of themselves they needed the world to keep believing, worth more to them than a man's life. The whole world ran on it. I had simply never stood close enough to hear one of them say it out loud. "Thank you," I told Gerald, and I meant every word. I have learned a great deal. I left him counting his coins, and I began, very quietly, to do the arithmetic. I walked back into Gerald's counting room the way you walk into a shop you already own. He was where I had left him the day before, smug behind the same desk, a fat bag of coin in his fist, because a man like that never once sets his money down. I laid 3,000 silver on the wood in front of him. Tuition, I told him. Payment for the lesson he had taught me, that a wage is only worth what the man paying it decides to honor. He heard the number and not the sentence. He reached for the coins. Of course he did. "This is a collection," I said, and I raised my right hand. "Activate, subspace, slash." I never touched him. I brought it down on the room instead, one quiet motion, and the desk came apart in 2 clean halves. The strongbox went with it, the ledgers, the shelf behind him, the far wall, a single line drawn through everything he owned, so smooth it did not stir the dust. His coin bag dropped from his hand and rolled across the floor between us. He stared at the 2 pieces of his desk. Then he stared at me, and I watched it reach him at last. the thing his whole comfortable life had never once made him learn. He could not fight this, and he could not run from it. For a long moment, the only sound was that coin bag rolling to a stop against the far wall he no longer had. Everything he had ever used to feel large. The desk he sat behind, the box he kept his gold in, the walls he did his cheating inside. I had opened like a letter and left him sitting in the middle of it with nothing between him and the day. He tried the only weapon he had left. He started reciting the law at me. There was no rule, he said, that made a man pay a wolfkin a human wage. The girl was beneath it. The money was his. I let him finish. Do you know what she ate yesterday? I asked him. Poison. Root she scraped out of a puddle, because you left her nothing to buy bread with. I told him the plain shape of it. I had lent that girl a skill on the strength of his promise to pay her. She had done the work. The skill had made him a real profit, and he had pocketed every coin of it and starved her for the rest. So I was here to take back what my investment had earned. The smile was gone now. No more talk of law. He clutched the empty air where his desk had been, and for the first time in his life, a consequence was standing in front of him with nowhere to send it. The door came in off its hinges before I finished. Echo caught it before it fell and set it against the wall like she was tidying a room, not standing in a ruin. Master, I brought Hazel. She stepped aside. The poison was a small dose. Her body is fine. I treated her with the borrowed token, and I will settle that debt later, with interest. Hazel came in behind her, still in her rags, looking at the halved desk and the halved wall, and understanding none of it. Now, I said to Gerald, say it again, in front of her. He said it. Cornered, sweating, he walked her through his own cleverness. The meal deductions billed against days she had never worked. The fees for bags he called damaged. The whole trick that had shrunk 3,000 silver down to 600 and left her eating out of a puddle. Hazel listened to it with her chin up and her hands very still. I crouched by the wreck of the strongbox and lifted out one large gold coin, 100,000 silver, the true worth of what she had given him. I put it in her hands. Wait, she said. This much? All of this? What you were owed, I told her. Nothing more. The rest of his coin I gathered back into the pouch and dropped at his feet. I take what is owed, I said, and not one coin past it. I would not become a thief to punish one. Then I set a single gold coin of my own on the broken wood. A repair fee, I told him. The building had done nothing wrong, and because the lesson would not otherwise stick, I flicked it, six-fold arms behind my thumb, and it crossed the room like a loosed bolt and struck him square between the eyes. He sat down hard. We are even, I said, and we walked out through the crowd that had gathered to watch. Behind us, I could hear him already, up off the floor and screaming a name into the street. Elmore, his overseer. The man who had once called Hazel a dog with a garbage skill. I let myself not hear it. The way you let yourself not hear a debt you already know you will be paying. I took her wages and I spent the first of them on her. A bath and then a tailor. She would not choose anything, so Echo chose for her. Short trousers she could run in. A cropped shirt cut to leave her tail free. When Hazel came out in them, she turned once on her heel to see herself and forgot to be guarded about it. Don't laugh, she said. You look strong, I told her. I meant it, and she heard that I meant it, and she did not know what to do with her face. Back at the inn, I asked her the question I had been holding since the wheat yard. Your real skill was never leg strength, I said. Was it? She went still. Then, sitting on the edge of the bed with her new clothes on and her tail low, she told me why she had let a man like Gerald rob her to the bone and never lifted a hand. The wolf people never turn their strength to their own gain. Not for money, not for pride. No matter how vile the man in front of them, no matter how much the holding back burns, their power is only ever drawn for someone they trust with their life, never for themselves. I understood it then, all of it. The starving, the stillness, the 600 silver paid without a fight. That was when my detection skill lit. Bodies, moving with intent, closing on the inn from the road. Somewhere between 20 and 40 of them, armed, and at the front of them, 2 readings I already knew. Gerald, and beside him, the overseer, come with swords and clubs to take back by force what the law would no longer give him. I looked at Hazel. Can I be that someone? I asked her. The one you fight for? She did not hesitate. Wolves never forget a debt, she said, and she got to her feet. She spoke an old thing under her breath, a call to her ancestors, asking the spirits of her people to lend their power to their daughter, and the room filled with light. Gold poured up her arms and over her shoulders, claws and fangs, and a mantle of golden fur. Mana shaped into the shape of a beast, the fang wolf regalia, the skill she had buried under a decoy for as long as she had known what humans did with power they found in a girl. I'm going, she said, and she was gone through the window before the glass had finished ringing. She dropped into the middle of them like a stone into a pond. The first 3 were off their feet before they knew a girl had left the building. One impact, and the front of the mob simply came apart. Elmore bellowed something at her, some boast about taking everything she had. He carried a whiplet with an arm strength skill, and he was proud of it. "Everything," she said back, flat, over the noise. "Then I will take everything of yours," he lashed at her. She was not where the whip landed. Her kick folded him in the middle and put him on the ground, and he did not get up, and she was already past him and into the rest. She counted them. 1, she said, and a man went down. 2, another. 3, 4. She said the numbers the way he had once said the deductions on her wage. Cold, patient, itemized. "I can count to 100 billion, she told them, as they backed away from her. "How far do you want to go?" They could not understand it. I watched their faces from the window, and I knew exactly what they were failing to grasp, that a girl this strong had ever stood still and let herself be robbed. They had one explanation for restraint, and it was weakness. They could not imagine principle. They only saw a fool too soft to hit back. I had seen that look before, aimed at me, across a party I once carried on my own borrowed strength. The men who marched me down into a dungeon to die had worn it exactly. It costs nothing to be wrong about a quiet person. It only costs everything later. Echo watched the gold reading on the field climb. 10 when Hazel started, past 200 as she moved, past 900 now, and still rising. "Is that different from a unique skill?" she asked me. "Endemic," I told her. "It feeds on the land's own mana. The longer she fights on this ground, the stronger she gets." I watched the last of the mob decide, too late to run. On her own soil, she does not lose. There was no number they could have brought. More than 30 of them, and then none. And through all of it, Hazel had only one word left. "Return it." She said it to each of them as they fell. "My property, my time, my dignity, all of it. Return it." It was not really the mercenaries she was saying it to. It was every year of it. While she cut a path toward the office, Echo and I stepped ahead of her. Spatial leap. One blink of shifted ground, and we were standing in the wreck of the counting room before Gerald reached it. I had already found the hollow he had dug beneath the floor, the little hidden room where he meant to wait us out. I had sealed every way into it before he ever ran. He came stumbling in and found us there instead of an escape, and he turned on me and called us demons. Heartless demons, both of us. Then he saw Hazel in the doorway behind me, gold to the shoulders, her reading past 80,000 now, and her eyes no longer wild, settled, quiet, done being afraid. And he changed his prayer and begged me to save him from her. I stood between them, not for him. His life was worth nothing to me and less to her. I stood there because killing a registered man, even a thing like Gerald, would put her on the wrong side of the law forever, and I would not let this be the day she stopped being able to go home. "Don't move from that spot," I told him. "There is nowhere left to run." And she stopped. A hand's breadth from him. All that gold banked and burning, she stopped, because I had asked her to, and a wolf keeps her word even to the man who broke his. He gave it all back. Every coin, every deed, every holding, the warehouses and the labor contracts, and the name he traded under, signed over to the last, because a ruined man with his life still in his hands will sign anything you put in front of him. I did not touch him again. I did not need to. A beating heals. A man learns to wear the memory of it like a story he survived, but you cannot heal back into being the richest man in a town once the whole town has watched you kneel and give it away. The point had never been his body. The point was that when the sun went down, the richest man in Milford owned nothing, and the wolf girl he had starved was still breathing, and still standing, and paid in full. The morning after Gerald fell, the town greeted us. It was strange to walk down a road where doorways opened toward me instead of away. Someone asked Hazel about the divine wolf power. A little girl waved at Echo, and Echo waved back, delighted with herself. Hazel squirmed under all of it and stayed close to my shoulder. We had come out of it with the whole of Gerald's fortune, 7,470,631 silver coins, a staggering weight of money for a town of about 100 souls. "You should think about your own happiness for once," Echo said, walking the coin bag along beside me. "For once, master. If you will not, I will simply have to find ways to make you happy myself." I told her I meant to spend all of it here, in Milford, before we left. Drain a town this small of that much coin, and I would gut it as badly as Gerald ever had. "Call it my own selfish whim," I said. She gave me a look that said she did not believe the selfish part for a moment. Raina kept the jewelry shop, and Raina had hated Gerald as much as anyone, so she was glad to help us spend his money. "That is a fine sum," she said, when I told her what I meant to leave with her. "And I have just the thing." She brought out 3 amber pendants, each one a deep, warm gold, each a little different in its tone. "The wolf tribes used to wear these," she told us. "Consort stones, old gems that had drunk in the land's mana over for long years. The two of us suited them, she said, and pressed all three on us at a price cut out of pure spite for the man they had belonged to trade with. I chose the one with the strongest gold in it, the exact color of the light that had poured up Hazel's arms in the street. The wolf tribes wore these, I said, and held it out to her. Hazel, this one is yours. She took it like it might break in her hands. She did not say anything. Her tale gave her away instead. She pulled me aside before we reached the end of the street, into the shade between two buildings where no one would hear. I wanted to thank you, Marcus, she started, and then the thanks came apart in her mouth, and what was underneath it came out instead. Her tail was trembling. She had been carrying this alone for a long time, and it showed in how badly she said it. Please, come to where I was born. The Hidden Hollow, she called it. A hidden village up in the mountains past the town, a refuge for the beast folk who had lost everything in a war no one remembered them for, her people. And beside it, under the peaks, something no human map had ever named. An S-rank dungeon, the Azure End, stirring in the dark beneath her home. Her village needed help. She had come down out of those mountains to find it, and had found instead a wheat yard, and a man who cheated her, and a puddle of poison root. And then she had found me. I thought about the pendant already warm in her hand, and the gold that had poured off her in the street, and the words she had said over and over to a mob until there was no one left to say it to. Return it. I'll come, I said. I did not know yet what was waking under those mountains. I only knew I had a champion now, and 3 stones no one else understood the worth of, and somewhere behind me, a party that had thrown me away and would, in time, come looking for what they had lost. That account was still open. It would keep. For this morning, I had a girl who had asked me home and a road to walk her down. The rest of the arithmetic could wait. I was not there. I want that clear before I tell it. While I walked Hazel west toward her people, the account I had left open behind me came due, and this is how it collected. I have pieced it together since from a dozen tongues, and I tell it the way I heard it, because a man should know exactly what his own arithmetic bought. The carriage the Duke sent was a fine thing, all velvet and dark polished wood, and Roland lay back in it like a man born to be carried. He turned the wine in his glass and told the others that this, finally, was the treatment his rank deserved. Years of clawing through dungeons, and at last, the world had caught up to what he was. Gordon sprawled across 2 seats and could not stop laughing. It felt less like a monster hunt, he said, and more like being waited on by servants. The coachman had promised the suspension was built so a full cup of tea would not spill, no matter how broken the road. There was a 5th seat, and it was empty. That seat had been mine. Roland looked at it and made a joke about how quiet the trip was, without the useless one dragging behind, and Gordon laughed again, and Elena slept through all of it with her head tipped against the window. Only Tina did not laugh. She sat pale and folded small, and she murmured that perhaps they should have kept a little more distance from something. She could not have said what. She only felt the floor of the thing tilting under her, the way you feel a stare that is not there in the dark. Roland told her to relax. The Duke was waiting. Tomorrow, the whole court would watch the Sword Saint work. The wine spilled after all. A hard jolt threw it across Roland's fine sleeve, and when he looked up, 2 venom boars had planted themselves square across the road. A pair of them, nothing. A top-rank hero should scatter 2 venom boars without leaving his seat, and Gordon knew it too, which was exactly why Gordon suddenly discovered he was carsick and could not possibly move. Elena slept on, so Roland climbed down himself, still brushing wine off his cuff, already bored, and reached inside himself for the skill that had made his name. He called up Sword Saint, and Sword Saint threw him like a rag. The skill fired the way it always had, all that explosive speed uncoiling at once. Except now, there was nothing steering it. No sight quick enough to match the speed. The world smeared into a wall of nothing, and he was already off his feet before he understood he had left them. And then the ground came up and took him. He hit hard. He rolled. He lay in the road dust with the wind knocked clean out of him. He got up. He would tell himself later he only slipped. He set his feet and called it again, and it threw him again. Exactly the same. Speed with no eyes behind it, a blindfolded man fired out of a bow. This time, he came up retching, bringing the Duke's good wine back into the dirt, on his hands and knees in the road, while 2 boars watched him and decided he was not worth the trouble. That was when my voice came back to him. He had not thought of it in days, standing over him in that empty dungeon, quiet, almost kind, telling him to return everything. He had heard the word and filed it under nonsense and gone to his wine. He knelt in the dirt and he understood for one cold second that it had not been nonsense at all, that something was gone out of him and was not coming back. And then he did the thing men like Roland always do. He buried it. He told himself he was tired. He was off. The road had rattled him. The demonstration was one day away, and the great sword saint had no idea on earth how he was going to perform it. You should understand what a demonstration is, since it is the thing that broke him. Nobles cannot be marched into dungeons, so the heroes come to them. The monsters are captured and caged by A-rank teams, loosed into a walled court, and the great ones cut them down while the nobility watch and decide whom to reward, whom to patronize, whom to lift into their own ranks. Clear enough dungeons, shine bright enough here, and a common adventurer can walk out ennobled. Duke Ashford sat above it all, a great lord, 3 generations down from a prince, his lands taken and held by war, cold, still, watchful. He is important to this story for reasons none of them guessed that afternoon. So mark him now, high in his seat, unreadable, a man who measures everything he looks at and keeps the sum to himself. A black-suited butler opened the court and invited the assembly to enjoy the supreme technique that had conquered the demon's descent. The Silver Blades, he announced, the hero party. Roland stepped out and gave a speech. He had refused a professional to write it, the way lords always offer, and so he stood before the Duke and stumbled through his own flattery, praising a war record he half remembered, and the Duke gave him the barest nod, the kind you give a servant you are already forgetting. Then the cage opened, and 50 army ants poured out. 50. It was, I think, a small cruelty of scheduling. Roland's whole style was built to end one huge thing in a single pass. Give him a monster the size of a house, and he would split it down the middle and bow. 50 small fast things scattering across a court was a format that showed every flaw a swordsman had, and Roland's flaw that day was that he could not see. Gordon was posted at the front as a living shield to draw the swarm. Roland set his feet and fired Sword Saint into the open court. He overshot the whole thing, all that speed and no eyes to aim it, and he sailed clean past the ants and slammed into the bars of the monster cage. He peeled himself off and tried again, and this time he clipped one ant across a leg before he went down on his face. A third pass sheared an antenna and dropped him in the dirt in front of the entire court. He laughed. He got up laughing, waving one hand, telling them he was a little off today, that he would land the next one clean. On the 7th generation of a warlord's line and half the A-rank teams in the region, he stood there and asked them to believe he was only a little off. They did not believe him, and this is the part that matters more than the crashing. So I will slow down for it. The A-rank adventurers ringing the court were a step below top rank, but they were not fools, and they had watched swordsmen their whole lives. One of them said it low, almost to himself. He can't see. Look at him. He's swinging blind. The man beside him took it up, quieter still, and the quiet was worse than shouting. Hawk's Eye, he said. That was the skill that let a sword saint survive his own speed. And Hawk's Eye, everyone in the trade knew, had never been Roland's. It had been lent to him by the useless one, by the support who used to sit in the 5th seat. Then a third voice, and this is the one that opened the door. If Hawk's Eye had been lent to him, the man said slowly, then what about fast-chant? What about endless mana spring? Those had come from the same place, and the pile of skills the big tank leaned on. And the healer, someone said, the healer had 10, as many as 10. The whole court began, very quietly, to do the arithmetic. How many skills had the useless one been lending, and to how many of them? I had spent years being the thing no one counted. It was strange, hearing later that the day they finally started counting was the day I was 3 provinces away, walking a wolf girl toward a mountain, thinking about nothing but her supper. Here is where it stopped being farce. Roland, panicking now under all that laughter, refusing to walk off the field because walking off in front of the Duke would end him anyway, set his feet one more time and fired the skill blind into the court. And it went fully wild. There is no gentle way to tell it, so I will tell it plain. That last uncontrolled burst of Sword Saint tore across the arena in the wrong direction entirely, off its leash, aimed at nothing, and the line it drew ran up toward the tiers where the Duke's own family sat. It came near enough that a lord's wife and children felt the wind of a thing that should never have come within a mile of them. Near enough that every soldier in the court had his hand on his sword before it was over, and the whole assembly understood in one held breath that the great hero was not a fraud only. He was a danger. I want you to see it the way the court saw it, because this is the moment the debt paid its first real coin. A man who had spent years being carried, being fed rewards, cutting a useless supports share down to nothing, and laughing about the empty seat, standing alone in the middle of a walled court in front of the one lord he most wanted to impress, swinging a borrowed sword he could no longer aim, with the whole world finally watching him miss. The Duke did not shout. Men like the Duke never do. He simply rose and turned and took his family out of the court, and in the turning of his back, he withdrew every scrap of favor he had ever considered granting the Silver Blades. It was done between one breath and the next. That is how power discards you. Not with a verdict, with a shoulder. And then, all at once, the rest of the party learned what I had taken. Tina reached for her healing. She had felt something wrong for days. And now, kneeling by Roland, she called up the angel's white wings that had made her a hero. The gentle white light that had knit their wounds shut 100 times. Nothing came. She called it again and again, hands shaking, and there was nothing there at all. And she broke apart on the arena floor, weeping that heaven itself was punishing her for some sin she could not name. She never understood, even then, that heaven had nothing to do with it. The light had never been hers. It had been mine, and I had asked for it back. Elena stood over the two of them, hollow-eyed, and simply announced that her ancient magic was dead, gone, unavailable. Then she did the only useful thing left in her, which was cruel and honest at once. She spat on Roland's forehead and told him, flat, that spit was said to have healing in it, and that this was the best support she had left to give. The mage who had understood, a moment too late, exactly what kind of debt she had signed, now hollowed out and past caring. Gordon lasted longest and broke hardest. Robbed of the borrowed speed that had let a slow, heavy man move like a fast one, he stood rooted at the front of the court as the 50 army ants he was meant to hold turned and came for him, and he could not move fast enough to matter. He screamed. He begged to know why his own arms would not swing his own greatsword, why the things kept coming, why no one would kill them before they reached him. The A-rank teams and the Duke's soldiers waded in and dragged him out before the swarm finished the work. He came out alive. He did not come out whole. Something in a man breaks when he stands fully awake and helpless, while death walks up to him unhurried, and that break does not heal. 4 heroes, a dead magic, a vanished blessing, a shattered tank, and a sword saint who could no longer see. And in the 5th seat, the empty one they had joked about all the way down the Western Road, nothing at all. They had built themselves entirely out of a thing they never once thanked. I took the thing back. The rest was only gravity. 7 days he waited, and then he did the last proud thing he had left. He wrote to the Duke and begged for an audience. If they only talked, he told himself, if the great lord only heard him out, all of it could be explained and undone. The butler brought the letter back, unopened. He delivered the Duke's reasoning with a courtesy so cold it cut deeper than any insult. Had Roland come forward honestly, the moment his skills turned unstable, and said so with any prudence, the Lord might have granted him a fresh chance in a few months. Men have off-seasons, but Roland had fired an uncontrolled skill once, and then again, and then a third time, toward a court that held the Lord's own wife and children. Had it struck them, the butler said, no one present would have been surprised. The Duke, being a merciful man, would bring no charge. Roland was young. He should broaden his view of the world and treasure his life. And then the butler offered one last dry courtesy on his way out. Perhaps, he said, if some disaster ever came to these lands, some great calamity or an uprising, the Lord might have cause to look Roland's way again. Until such a day, he should not write. Mark that line too. A disaster or an uprising. The butler meant it as the politest possible way of saying never. But there are men who spend their whole lives waiting for exactly that kind of door. And there was a lord in that house who would one day go looking for his own disaster to walk through. That is a debt for a later page. I only note that the seed of it was spoken aloud, cold and offhand, in a stale little room, and no one in the room understood it. Roland stood with his rejected letter, and finally, for one honest moment, read the room he was in. Elena's magic was dead. Tina's healing was gone. Gordon was a broken man who flinched at small sounds now. And the useless one, the one who had been the whole engine of them, was long gone and would not be found. A lesser man might have broken there. Roland did something worse. He decided it was not over. Because Roland had heard a name. A genius alchemist was coming to the region. A young prodigy the guild was already whispering about, and her name was Angelina. If she and Elena together could pull the right strings, he told himself, the road to the nobility was not shut, only delayed. He would rebuild, he would rise. He clung to the name the way a drowning man clings to a word. He did not know the first thing about her, neither did I then. That same night, at a small inn near the guild, a candle burned burned low in a plain room, and a young woman sat cross-legged on the floor, talking cheerfully to a little golem of stone no taller than her hand. She turned it over, checking its joints, telling it that tomorrow was finally the day. "We've come such a long way for this," she said to the stone. "Tomorrow we meet him." The golem said nothing, being stone. She set it upright on her palm and smiled at it, bright and certain, and told it she could hardly wait to meet the man who carried skill loan. She had come across half a country for exactly that, to find the one person in the world with her own impossible skill. Because Angelina, the last hope Roland was pinning his ruined future to, the ally he was already spending in his head, was not coming to save him at all. She had a skill loan of her own, and the man she was hunting, the man she had crossed a country to find, was not Roland. It was me. The account behind me had paid its first installment in full, in front of the whole court, and cracked the silver blades open for the world to read. It was not closed, not the half of it. Roland was alive and humiliated, and already turning his ruin into a reason, which is the most dangerous thing a small man can do. Somewhere ahead of us both, a cold lord was filing away the word uprising, and a bright girl was blowing out her candle, and I was 3 provinces west with a wolf at my side, thinking the hard part was behind me. The interest was still compounding. It had only just started to show. The town chief found me before I had finished breakfast. Victor was old and frightened, and out of other people to ask. He wanted me to hunt the monsters that had been thickening around Milford for months. The band of 40 he had hired to do it was the same band Hazel had already put down in the street, and no replacements had come. I said yes, not because the town moved me, because the swarm was telling me something the old man could not read. Monsters do not crowd a place for no reason. They leak. And the only thing they could be leaking out of was the Azure End, the S-rank dungeon sitting half a day west, right beside the valley Hazel called home. She went still when I said the name. A week earlier, she had asked me to help save her homeland, the Hidden Hollow, and I had told her we would go. Now I understood the whole shape of it. If the swarm reached the town, the crown would send soldiers to burn it back. Soldiers would comb the valley on their way, and a hidden village stays hidden only until someone with a banner comes looking for a reason to be there. So we clear the monsters first, I told her, then the dungeon. We don't leave Milford open behind us and hand the crown an excuse to come west. Echo agreed in that quiet way she has. Hazel only set her jaw. Home was close now, and every day it stayed close was another day it could be taken from her. I walked past the last fence and let the scout's instinct open across the land. 104, that was the count, scattered through the tree line and the far hills and the dry creek beds, close enough to matter. Then I cut them down, all of them, at once. The subspace slash does not swing through the air toward a thing. It cuts through space itself, folding the distance so the edge arrives everywhere I have marked at the same instant, and nothing a monster wears on its hide can turn it. I drew one line across the world. For a breath, the light bent along it, a seam opening through the fields and the hills, as if someone had scored the day with a knife. Then the seam closed, and the whole 100 came apart into harmless fragments, drifting down like ash over a mile of empty ground. Not one of them had time to move. Over 4 days, we cleared most of what was left. As we walked, Hazel kept asking how I made things vanish, and I finally told her the truth of my storage. It is not one skill at all. It is 3, braided into working like a vault. A deep frost that freezes ice, which will not melt for 1,000 years. A leap that moves that ice anywhere. A reach that widens the throw as far as I please. I freeze a hollow shell of it, pack it full, and fling it into high orbit above the sky, kept white so the sun can never warm it, into the dark sea over the world where nothing living has ever gone and come back. A vault no thief can climb to. By the end, I had a dozen of those eggs riding above the clouds, packed with monster materials worth tens of millions of silver. Somewhere in those 4 days, Hazel's own account settled too. The 10 days on the duration enhancement I had lent her ran out. She repaid it, and the skill simply stayed. She had leaned on it so hard through her fang wolf that she had banked far more than she owed. Echo told her the number. Hazel just stared at her own hands as if they belonged to someone luckier. We brought a dozen ice eggs down to the town secretary and set them on his floor. He dropped his ledger. The raw material inside them would have crushed a post town's little treasury under its own weight, so I did not sell it to them. I lent it. 10 years. Pay in coin once it turns to cash or pay in cooperation when I come asking. Victor took the terms before the secretary had stopped shaking. I told Hazel later what the loan really was. A town you have bought keeps a secret far longer than a town you have threatened. The arrangement tied Milford to us, sealed their mouths about the hollow, and set a supply line running quietly to her people, all without a blade drawn or a coin taken by force. I learned a long time ago that force only ever brings more soldiers, and soldiers were the one thing I could not afford anywhere near that valley. With the town quiet behind us, we turned west at last, toward the azure end and the hollow that hid beside it. The land toward the hollow was cruel on purpose. Crumbling rock, dry sand, savage swings from heat to cold, all of it a wall no army would bother to climb. As we crossed it, Hazel told me the history of her people. They had been driven out of a war generations back. The men and the elders died fighting. Only the women, the children, and the smallest tribes fled into a valley too harsh for anyone to want. Her grandfather's band had settled there and called it the Hidden Hollow. They never let smoke rise straight up, she said. That was the rule that kept them off every map, which was how I knew, the moment I saw the column of it climbing the horizon, that something had gone very wrong. My divine eye read the smoke before I took another step. Too much of it, too black, rising straight and careless into a sky it was never supposed to touch. Hazel saw my face and started to run. I did not let her run. I caught her and Echo both and used the space leap to put all three of us above the valley in a single jump. The Hidden Hollow was burning. Insect monsters crawled over the rooftops in a black tide, and the houses under them were going up one after another. Whatever rule had kept this place off the maps for 3 generations was gone. The whole valley was a beacon now, screaming its own location into the dark. Hazel pointed at the most ruined house of them all and screamed that it was hers. I opened the 6-fold arms, 6 arms no eye can see, took her under 2 of them and Echo under 2, and drove through the swarm with the rest, sweeping monsters off our line like a man clearing branches from a path. I did not slow for any of them. The house was the only thing that mattered. At the door, she tore free. Her fang wolf blazed up gold along her arms, and she ripped the swarm off her own walls with her hands and dragged 2 people out of the smoke, her father and her mother, Asa and Rose. Both of them burned, both of them senseless, neither of them moving. She got them clear of the fire and put her hands on them, a healing skill I had lent her. And after a long, terrible moment, their breathing steadied. Barely, but it steadied. I stood in the wreck of a village that had done nothing to earn this, and for one moment I let myself ask what any of it was for. All the order and the walls and the banners men build, when it always comes down hardest on the people with the least. Then I put the thought away. Grief is loud, and I had work. The monsters were pouring from the dungeon. Kill what sat at the bottom of the azure end, its king, the thing spawning the tide, and the flood would stop. So that was where I was going. I lent Hazel the scout's instinct, so she could run if it all went wrong. She fought me on it at once, swearing she would not flee, not even to save her own life. I won't run, she said, and her hands closed into fists. Not even if it kills me. I know. I folded the skill into her anyway. Take it. Wanting the people you care about to live is a human thing. Humor me. She took it, and she stayed, to help her people out of the fire. I was turning to go when Asa's lips began to move. His eyes never opened, but his mouth worked around something, and Hazel bent low over him to catch it. It was a warning. He rasped that the fire had not wandered out of the dungeon on its own, that a man's will was behind it, and the name he gave the man was a great lord's, Ashford. He broke off before he could say more, but he had said enough. I filed the name away and went. Gordon still owed me. His account had gone so far into the red, he would never climb out, and I reached across that debt now and took the last of his unique skill, obsidian, the one that hardens and weights the body. In my hands, it grew into something better, a diamond barrier, a hard, bright film over skin and cloth that turns a blow aside before it lands. I stacked it with the 6-fold arms and the iron breaker, the charge that punches straight through whatever stands in the way, and drove into the dungeon mouth on the west slope, through the swarm still boiling out of it. The azure end was an S rank, and an S rank holds a whole sky inside it. The 4th floor proved it, an endless sea of fresh water with a true horizon and a ceiling lost somewhere far overhead. Echo tasted the water and told me it was clean, spring clean. I laid the seraph's blessing over us anyway, because a thing that looks safe in a place like this usually is not. Then the sea rose against us. Serpents lifted out of the water, and a ceiling of bees packed the air thick enough that a clean space leap would only strand us halfway. So I built a boat. I grew it out of ice, seat, and reins, and a windshield of honed glass. woke the old wind magic, and drove us across the horizon in one long, ripping line. The serpents and the swarm broke against the hull and fell away in the wake. A quarter of an hour into the dungeon, and we ran for the bottom of it. By the 13th floor, my divine eye caught 4 humans ahead of us, wrapped in perception-blocking skills, hiding, not exploring. That alone was wrong. This place was supposed to be unknown to anyone who carried a banner. Then I read the crest they wore, and the wrongness took a shape. A great house's mark, Ashford, the same name the old wolf had rasped in the ash. They saw us and blocked the path. When they demanded my name, I gave it plainly, Marcus, a former guildman, and that was all it took. They knew the name from the Silver Blades, and they laughed. They had found this dungeon themselves, they told me, and were storming it alone to win the Duke's favor now that the Blades had embarrassed him in public. They took me for a man the guild had thrown out and told me to run home to whatever gutter had spat me up. Not one of them ever guessed I had left on my own 2 feet. 3 provinces east, the party I had walked away from was still coming apart in front of crowds. Every skill I had lent them was guttering out on the schedule I had set. The borrowed sword saint throwing Roland into walls, and his hunt for the man who had ruined him hardening colder by the day. The soldiers laughing in my face were just the far end of the same account. I let them laugh. Then the swordsman reached out and tore the pendant from Echo's neck, an old wolf people treasure heavy and gold on its chain, and flung it into a moss bog at the side of the hall. A small cruelty, to make a point. They turned and walked through the stone door at the far end, promising to teach me on the other side what real strength looked like. Echo apologized for letting it be taken and offered to search alone. No, I was already reading the bog. We looked together. That belongs to Hazel's people. It's worth the minutes. I swept the bog with the divine eye and the 6 arms and had the pendant out in a breath. Not sunk deep, only tossed. I honed the muck off it and fastened it back at Echo's throat, which was when I saw the thing the soldiers had not lived long enough to warn me about. Blood was running out from under the stone door. Human red, not a monster's. A thin, steady stream of it, spreading across the floor toward the bog. They had been so sure. Men bold enough to challenge a dungeon's king would never sweat a floor's general, one of them had told me. I put Echo behind me and told her not to look. General class monsters like to strike the instant a door opens, so I did not open this one clean. I cut first. The void wrench sheared through the tentacles already snaking out under the frame before they could find us, and I stepped through. Inside, the 4 soldiers who had laughed at me were dead. A snare snail had them, a monster the size of a house, blue and purple and slick with its own mucus, tentacles still coiling through the dark. The 2 mages were gone. The swordsman who had thrown the pendant was pinned against the far door. Whatever real strength they had meant to teach me, the room had taught them first. I did not gloat. There was nothing in it worth enjoying. My divine eye found the last of them still alive, folded down into the corner under a stealth skill, shaking. A scout, a young woman with both hands pressed over her mouth, whispering the same words again and again, that this was divine punishment, that heaven had finally come to collect. I cut the tentacles back and crossed to her. I did not raise my voice. I told her the only thing I had to offer in a room like that. Answer me honestly, and I will take you out of here alive. She broke, and what came out of her dropped the floor out from under the whole thing. The swarm that burned the hollow had not wandered out of the dungeon on its own. Her squad had made it happen. On the leader's order, and the Duke's order beneath that, they had gone into that valley and destroyed a village on purpose. Not as a battle, as evidence. A ruined village and a slaughtered people would make the story of a coming dungeon tide look true, and a true tide meant a crisis, and a crisis meant favor and power for the Lord who rode out to answer it. They had burned Hazel's home to forge a lie. Then they had come down here to seize the dungeon and sell the rest of the story on top of it. She named the man who gave the order, and behind him, the house that had paid for it, Ashford. The same name the old wolf had rasped in the ash. The same crest on the dead men at my feet. It all closed into one shape. So this was never a monster disaster. It was a man's decision. A great lord had looked at a hidden valley full of the already defeated and decided their village was worth more to him as ash than as anything else it could ever be. I looked at the dead squad and did the arithmetic the Duke would do without me. 4 of his men, sent in secret, gone into the Wolves Valley and never coming back out. He would never learn a snail had killed them down here. He would hear only that they went west and vanished, and he would write it down as the wolves, an uprising. Exactly the excuse a man like that had been waiting for someone to hand him, except I had the one witness who could tell it straight, still shaking in the corner with her hands over her mouth, Mira Brand. The Duke had opened an account, and he did not yet know that someone was keeping the book. Roland's debt was still open behind me, still owed, still quietly compounding. But it had company now. There was a second name in the ledger, a bigger one than Roland's, and it had been gathering interest since the day that village burned. I told the scout to get on her feet. We were not finished. The thing spawning the tide was still alive at the bottom of the world, and I meant to collect every coin of what it had cost. The snare snail filled the hall from the wet floor to a ceiling I could not find. It was bigger than the pale worm I had put down under the demon's descent, and until that moment, I had believed nothing in any dungeon came bigger than the worm. 259 tentacles unrolled out of the blue-purple mass, each one tipped with an eye, and all of them turned on me at once. I put the deep frost into the air and drove it at the shell. The cold struck the black spiral, glazed it white, and slid off. A skin of frost over stone, nothing beneath it. The shell was harder than anything my ice had ever bitten. Echo watched it slough away. She said that with my reach, I could go in past the shell instead, strike the soft interior where the thing wore no armor at all. We're not here for a clean kill, I told her. We're here to reach the bottom. Mira was still folded into her corner, the last living thing off that squad, both hands pressed over her mouth. I told her to cover her eyes, cover her ears, and not move until it was over. She pressed herself smaller against the wet stone. Good enough. The shell would not break for my cold, so I would break the floor with the shell. I reached with Space Leap and folded the space above the whole snail, all of it, 259 tentacles and the mountain of shell behind them, and I dropped it straight up into the dark. Then I opened the six-fold arms, 6 arms of shaped force, and my own 2 behind them, though the skill only ever counted 6. 8 then. I have never trusted a label over an arm. I caught the falling snail with every one of them, put the storm wind behind the push, and drove it down. It hit the floor like a dropped mountain. The stone that every scholar alive swore was unbreakable, cracked, buckled, and gave, and the snail went through it into the floor below in a single crater of sound. For 1,000 years, men had dug straight down from the first floor of every dungeon and hit the same hard layer, waist deep, and called it the bottom of the world. They never had a hammer heavy enough. I had one now, and it weighed as much as a hill. I leapt down after it and did it again. 2 of the 6-fold arms I kept wrapped around Echo and the scout, holding them close and still in the falling. The other arms were for the snail. I hauled it up out of its own crater and slammed it down, and the floor beneath gave the same as the last. One more time. The 14th floor broke to a floor of water, a black underground sea, and the impact threw it into a wall of spray that froze before it landed. One more time. The 15th broke to fire, a red furnace floor, and the snail went down through it hammering sparks in a long comet tail, the heat washing up the shaft after us and dying against my ice. One more time. A floor of pale forest, trees older than any kingdom snapped off at the root in a ring around the crater. And then the crater took the trees too. I did not slow down for any of it. Each floor was only the next thing between me and the king. And the king was the only thing that mattered, because the king was the tap, and everything else was just the water already spilled. Kill the tap and the flood stops on its own. So I kept the hammer swinging and let the wonders of the deep dungeon pass by like fence posts on a road. The snail did not die. It pulled deep into its shell and let the shell take everything, and the shell was built to take it. That suited me. A living hammer keeps its shape better than a dead one. Down and down. I stopped counting the environments and only counted the slams, and each slam was the same 2 words in my head. One more time. Echo said nothing, trusting the arm around her. Behind us, the scout had stopped making any sound at all, which I took for the good kind of quiet. The dungeon had spent an age teaching the world that its floors were the one wall no one crossed. I was writing a different lesson into it, one crater at a time, all the way down. On the 52nd floor, the shell finally met a stone that would not give, and this time it was the shell that gave. It shattered. In the same breath, the snail died, its long body going slack around the broken spiral, and the floor split open beneath the crater into a wide dark that swallowed the falling dust. The bottom, the king's floor. Behind me, the scout breathed out something small and broken. She could not make herself believe a dungeon floor had broken at all. She said it the way you say a thing you have been taught your whole life is a law of the world, that people cannot run across water, that people cannot fly, and so a floor cannot break. All of it the same impossible. I looked back at her. "What's your name?" "Mira Brand," she said, as if surprised to still have one. I told her you could run on water if you set your left foot down and lifted it before the right one had time to sink. She said that was practically impossible. Practically impossible and impossible are two different things, I said. We just stepped over the line between them. There was no time to sit with it. Below us, the thing that had spawned the whole tide was still alive, and above us, a valley was burning while we talked. "Echo," I said. "We're going." "Yes, master," she answered, and reached for the arm I already had around her. I dropped into the pit. Water was pouring down the shaft I had opened, enough to flood a bottom floor and drown a fight before it started. I froze it in the air. The deep frost caught the whole falling sheet and hung it against the wall as a webbed pane of ice, and the chamber went quiet under it. Two arms of the sixfold shielded Echo and the scout. Four caught our landing soft. I scanned the dark, and in all that vast space, there was exactly one living thing. It sat at the center like a hill that had learned to breathe. A toad. If a toad could be the size of a war tent, wrapped in an aura so heavy it pressed on the ears. The dungeon's king. I took up the half of the black shell that had survived the fall, sheathed it in ice to hone the broken edge, and grew the ice out past it into a spear taller than two of me. The king felt us arrive. It had held that pit alone since before the valley above had a name, and now something had simply fallen through its unbreakable ceiling, and its great aura wavered, just for a breath, the first uncertainty a king ever feels. Then it chose pride. It heaved up off the stone with a roar that shook the frozen sheet of water on the wall and cracked a web of lines across it, and it threw all of that mass at me in one charge. The floor of the pit jumped under my boots. The pressure of the thing coming was a wall of its own. I charged back. I did not brace and wait for it. Waiting was what its size wanted from me. I ran straight into the charge. Low, the ice spear leveled and the storm wind screaming behind my shoulders to push me faster than a thing that heavy could turn. We closed in the middle of the pit. I put everything into the point, the 8 arms all behind the shaft, the honed edge of the broken shell riding the tip, every scrap of the deep frost packed into the head of it, and I drove it home under the great weight before the weight could come down on me. There was one enormous sound, the whole chamber ringing like the inside of a struck bell. Then a smaller sound, further in. Then the aura that had been pressing on my ears since I landed simply stopped, the way a held note stops when the singer runs out of breath, and the silence after it was total. The king came down. All that mass that had ruled the bottom of the world went slack and folded in on itself and did not get up, and the whole heavy weight of the place lifted off my shoulders at once, like a ceiling taken away. Far above, in a valley I could not see, every monster the dungeon had ever spat out went slack in the same instant. The source was cut. I felt it go, the way you feel a rope you have been hauling on suddenly slacken in your hands. The whole tide, the whole engineered disaster, every insect that had burned a village, and everything still crawling the ruins above, all of it emptied out in one breath because the one thing feeding them had stopped. This was the beast they had lured the monsters against. This was the king the whole demon tide poured out of, and it had lasted exactly one charge. I did not stop to look at what I had killed. There was still a burning valley over my head, and a girl standing in it. I was at the bottom of the world when Hazel made her stand, so I did not see the start of it, but I know how she fought because I know her. She held the surface alone. The Fang Wolf was up around her arms and shoulders, gold fur and clawed gauntlets, but the gold was thin. Her pendant, the deep amber one at her throat, reads the land's own power, and the land's power was almost gone, down to 11%, the stone barely glowing, the dungeon below draining the valley dry as it died. She had the scout's instinct I forced on her, and the duration enhancement that was hers now for good, and even braided together they were running out. In front of her stood a mantis taller than a house. Every voice she had was telling her the same easy thing, that it was fine to run, that no one would blame her, that running was allowed. She would not have it. She told me after, plainly, the way she says everything. "Don't tell me it's fine to run," she said. "Just because running's allowed doesn't mean I get to escape." She went up the ruined wall on the last of her strength, slipped inside the sweep of the monster's scythe, and took its head with claws that were already fading. It dropped. She dropped with it, gasping, the gold guttering off her arms. And then the borrowed instinct screamed in her skull, and she looked up. 15 more of them, identical, house tall, coming on in a formed column across the broken ground. Her father's voice broke over the ruin, Asa, half burned and back on his feet, shouting for her to fall back. Enough, get out. She heard something else under the mantises, something rising up from beneath the valley floor, and she set her feet instead of turning. I came up under her feet. Space leap broke me out through the ground ground between Hazel and the column, and I brought the dungeon up with me in my hands. The diamond barrier snapped on over skin and cloth, hard and clear. The six-fold arms opened, and I loosed a single iron-breaker bolt down the line. One shot. It went through the first mantis and did not stop. Punched through the second, the third, kept going, threading the whole formed column end to end on one straight line of force. Every one of the 15 strung on the same bolt, like beads on a wire. And then it halted in the air, a hand's width in front of Hazel's face, and hung there, spent, turning slowly. The 15 fell together, the whole column dropping at once, as if a single string holding them all upright had been cut. She stared at my back. She told me later it looked too large to her right then, wider than the valley. I did not feel large. I felt like a man who had been late and had only just made it. "Leave the rest to me," I said. Then I cleared the valley. 592 of them still stood among the burning houses, gone slack and hollow the moment their king died, but still on their feet, still between these people and mourning. Hazel had already felled close to 100 of them by herself before I ever broke the surface, and I would remember that later, that she had not waited to be saved before she started saving her own. The rest were mine to finish. I put the storm wind under all of them at once and lifted every monster in that valley, hauled up off the scorched ground together. 500 and more of them torn loose from the earth and left hanging in the smoke with nothing under their feet, helpless as stones thrown up and waiting to fall. For one breath, the whole burning sky was full of them. Then I closed the void rend and the deep frost together and shut my hand. They came apart in the air, all of them, in one stroke, in a single long sweep of cold across the valley, gone before they could land. The wind carried the last of it away, and the valley was only smoke and ruin and quiet. About 40 villagers were still alive in the soundest scorched house at the center, most of them hurt, all of them breathing. The tide was over. The hollow had held. They gathered me into the one house the fire had spared, and the wolf people's elder rose to meet me. Asa, he gave his name as, and his wife's, Rose, though she was not there, laid up somewhere with her burns and mending. He was still soot-marked and moving carefully around the pain, but his eyes were clear now and steady, and there was too much in them for me to look at straight. He thanked me. He offered me his house and everything left in it, which was not much and meant everything. I hesitated. Then I took it. Some gifts you do not refuse a man who has just watched his home burn. Then Asa said, lightly, almost shy, that if I ever meant to take a partner, I could take Hazel, that she was his daughter, and he could think of no one he would rather give her to. That's too much, I said, flatly, and at once, before it could sit in the room and become a real thing. I would not take a girl handed to me out of gratitude on the night her valley burned. Hazel made a sound behind her father like a kettle and went red to the ears and tried to disappear into the wall. I let it go. It was a kindness meant well, and the wrong kindness, and it was done. What Asa told me next was not done. His people once had a king, he said, a true one, in the old country, before the war drove them out. In the running, they lost the symbols of that kingship, and a people who lose their crown's proof lose the crown itself. So there had been no king since. Only elders, only men like him keeping the line warm with no authority to their name. He had called himself elder his whole life, the way you keep a chair empty at the table. Then he looked at the amber pendant at Hazel's throat and at the one Echo wore, and he told me what they truly were. They were not queenstones. That was only the name humans had put on them, not knowing. They were the royal treasures of his people, 3 of them, standing for the king, the king's spouse, and the king's heir. Passed down the generations, lost in the war, and now 2 of the 3 were here, in this ruined house, worn by the 2 who had just saved his world. Echo went still. She had carried hers up and down the west road and had it torn off her and thrown in a bog and cleaned it and fastened it back, never once knowing she wore a nation's crown at her collar. She tried to take it off and hand it back. So did I. Asa stopped us both. He went to a wrapped bundle by the wall and drew out a curved sword, a scimitar with a wet sheen, and a flame pattern running down the steel, forged by the dwarves who had lived beside his people in the old country before everything was lost. The second royal treasure, he said, the pendants and the blade together. That was what named a king of the forest, nothing less. Then he held the sword out to me, across both his burned hands, and asked me to be their king. I had killed the thing at the bottom of the world to stop it costing these people anything more. I had come down into that pit to collect a debt from a dungeon, the way I collect every debt. And now, here was an old man on the night his valley burned, holding out the last thing his line had left in the world and asking me to carry it. Not a payment, not interest, a trust. I looked at Hazel, red-eared and fierce beside him. I looked at Echo, gone quiet with the weight of the collar she had worn all this way without knowing. I looked at the flame-patterned steel lying across two burned hands in the lamplight. I had no words for him. Not yes, not no. The whole ruined room waited on me, 40 exhausted people breathing in the dark beyond the fire. And for the first time in a very long while, I could not tell you what the arithmetic said. The king was dead, and the valley was saved, and the debt to the dungeon was collected in full. And that should have been the end of the night's account. It was not. Somewhere out past these mountains, a great lord was already writing his own version of what had happened here. And a crown does not stop a man from coming. It only gives him a bigger thing to aim at. But that was tomorrow's ledger. Tonight, there was only the sword and the hands holding it out, and a question I had never once, in all my careful accounting, thought to prepare an answer for. Asa held the treasure sword out across both scorched hands, and behind him, the whole of the tribe went down on one knee at the same moment. There must have been 40 of them left, no more, standing in the last light of the houses that had burned to give it. Ash still came down soft as snow. The one house at their backs ticked and cooled, and every wolf in that valley, the old and the half-healed, and the children who did not understand why, knelt in the ruin and looked at me. Asa spoke for them. Their people had gone without a king since the war took the old line, he said, and a wolf bows to only two things, the strong and the proud, never to blood and never to age. They had weighed me, and they had chosen. If I would set my road down here and end it, his people would hunt for me, till for me, and fight for me until the last of them was gone. I nearly took it, not for a crown, for Echo. She had only learned to walk a little while ago, and here were walls, and a people, and a place a person could stop. My hand went out toward the black lacquered sheath before I had decided anything at all. Echo caught my wrist. Her fingers were light, and they did not let go. Master, the only sum I keep is what would make you happy. She held my eyes. That is why I stopped your hand. Please choose the road that leaves you satisfied, not the one that only leaves you settled. I drew my hand back. A crown taken on the night a valley burned would be a crown taken out of grief, and I had spent my whole life learning what it cost to answer grief with a reflex. So I told Asa I would not answer yet. I told him I had one question first, and a guess none of them had met. I brought her forward out of the dark at the edge of the fire, filthy, mud to the elbow, a scout of Duke Ashford's own elite. I told the tribe plainly what her squad had done, driven the monsters up out of the azure end on purpose, for a lord's favor, and left this valley to burn as their cover. Mira Brand did not look away, and she did not argue it. They had done it, she said, and she did not spare herself the word. The tribe came apart into noise, cries, a snarl somewhere, a mother's low sound of rage. I let it run until it wore itself thin, and then I said the only thing I had come there to say. Then decide. Her life is yours to weigh, not mine. That is my question to you. The arguments came fast, the way they do when people are frightened and want it to be simple. A black-haired young man was on his feet first, calling for a heavy sentence, blood for the burning and worse for the reason behind it. A steadier man twice his age answered him. She was the Lord's own soldier, and killing her bought a war the valley could never pay, so better to hand her back and trade her for the right to be left alone. Then a woman who spoke for the others cut across them both. The Duke would honor no bargain, and everyone knew it, she said. And a live pair of working hands was worth more than the satisfaction of a corpse. Put her to labor. Asa said nothing at all. He let every voice fall and did not weigh any of them yet. Then a young mother pushed through to the front, with a bundle held hard against her chest, and the noise went out of the crowd like a snuffed lamp. Her child had been caught in the attack. I will not draw you the picture of it. The breath had gone shallow and far apart, the little chest barely lifting, the thread of it fraying toward the place none of us can follow anyone. She had carried the baby through 2 days of dying, and she could carry it no further, and she screamed the question none of the arguing men would touch. Why was the one who had done this still breathing, while her child was slipping past where love could reach? Nobody had an answer to give her. Asa's mouth was a hard line. The black-haired young man had gone quiet. I had one. I just could not say it out loud. There is a skill I carry that can send my voice and nothing else, sealed off from the air so that only one chosen pair of ears catches it. I sent it across the fire to the cage at the edge of the dark, to Mira, and to no one else in that whole grieving valley. I asked her one thing first. If she could do something, would she do it? Then I told her what I had. A healing grown far past healing, past mending cuts and knitting bone, evolved until it could reach a life at the very edge and pull it back the way you pull a falling person by the wrist, but only if you reach them before the last breath was gone. I told her it could save the child, and I told her the price, because the price had to be hers and not mine, or it was worth nothing. The skill would leave her the instant I lent it, eaten by the interest on the loan, and it would take years off her own life to spend it, and I could not tell her how many, because no one ever knows that number until the end of it. She did not make me ask twice. Before my voice had finished, she said she would do it, and there was no hesitation anywhere in it, only something that had been waiting a long time for a way out. They let her out of the cage, and nobody quite knew why until they saw where she went. Mira crossed to the mother and knelt in the ash in front of her and asked, with her hands more than her mouth, to be given the child. The mother clutched tighter. Then she looked at the small failing thing in her arms and at the woman who had helped ruin her valley, and she gave the baby over because a drowning person does not check whose hand it is. Mira laid her palms on the little chest. The healing came up pale and warm and poured out of her, and I made myself watch all of it because she had earned a witness. The light went into the child, and something went out of Mira at the same time, in front of everyone. A grayness came into her face, a slackness, as if a hand were quietly drawing years out of her while we all stood there. She paid it where they could see. She did not flinch. The baby's breath caught, then it caught again, deeper. Then it steadied and slowed and evened out into the ordinary shape of a child asleep. Not raised, nothing raised, only caught at the last of the falling and drawn back over the edge before it was crossed. The mother folded down over her child and wept, and it was the first sound of joy that Valley had made in 3 days. The black-haired young man who had wanted her blood said, so quietly I almost missed it, that the little one had been the only one lost so far to the edge. Then he sat down and said no more, and Mira, gray and swaying, asked for more. She asked leave to spend the skill again, to reach the ones who had fallen beside her in the dark of the dungeon, a swordsman and 2 spellcasters, 6 years at her shoulder. She swore she would bring them back bound to service, made to work, made to stand for this valley on the day it finally had to sit across a table from the Duke. She said she did not care what it took off her own life to do it. That split the room clean down the middle. Half of them had just watched her buy a child's breath with her own years. The other half had not forgotten those same hands helped set the fires. And both halves were right, which is the thing nobody wants to be true. You could hate her for the valley and be grateful to her for the child in the same breath, and neither feeling was a lie, and neither one canceled the other out. I watched them try to hold both and hate that they had to. Hazel stood up into the middle of it. She tapped the flat of a blade against stone until the arguing stopped and the faces turned. We haven't heard her side, not once. She looked around at all of them. Deciding what a person is without letting her speak isn't justice. It's just the loudest grief in the room winning, and then the line that went through everyone and did not come out the other side. Refusing to save the ones you can still save, that's the same as killing them yourselves. Ace arose then, slow around his healing burns, and the room gave him its silence. As elder, he passed the judgment. A dead enemy paid no debt and built nothing, he said, and a soldier bartered away. Tonight was a card thrown down long before its turn. So Mira and the ones she meant to bring back would neither die nor be traded. They would labor. They would go into the azure end, emptied now that its king was dead, and gather up what a dungeon that deep still held, and they would keep gathering until the day the valley chose to be known to the world, and on that day, their return would be written into the price, mercy with a ledger under it. It was, near enough, the same arithmetic I had once done to a fat merchant in a counting room. I found I liked hearing it in someone else's mouth. Asa turned back to me and held the sword out a second time. I looked at them before I looked at it. A whole people that a war had thrown away generations ago and never once come back for, driven into a valley of cracked stone and killing heat, taught to keep their smoke from ever rising straight so the world would forget they were there, the stolen from, the left behind. And I thought about a man who had carried a party for 6 years, and the night they counted the cost of keeping him 1 year more and voted, all of them, to leave him to die in the dark to save the coin. The world had thrown me away too. It just had not managed to make it stick. Echo did not stop my hand this time. She only watched me, and I understood that this was the road she had been holding it back from the reflex to find. I took the sword. It was far heavier than a blade that size had any right to be, dwarf forged, a slow flame pattern running down the steel, and I felt the two amber stones I carried answer it, the one at my own throat and the one at Echo's. The old royal stones the wolves had lost when their line fell, kings and consorts both. Stone and steel, the elders had said. Together they name a king of the forest. I lifted the blade and the naming happened whether I was ready for it or not. An old wolf near the front had gone down, not on one knee, but on both, the way you kneel to a thing you had given up believing you would live to see. He had lost his line in the same war that made this valley, I would learn later, and he had kept the empty chair his whole life for a king who never came. He was weeping without any sound at all. I have collected a great many looks in my time: contempt, pity, the careful blankness of people deciding whether I was worth the coin of noticing. I had never once, in the whole account of my life, been looked at like that. A borrowed throne suits a borrowed man well enough. My voice did not shake, and I was faintly surprised by that. I'll hold it until one of you is fit to take it back. Then I said the rest, and I meant every word of it, more than I had meant anything in a long, careful, accounted life. I'll be king of the ones who've been stolen from, all of them, and I will take back what was taken. Echo was the only one still standing. She had stopped my hand at the start of the night because she wanted the choosing to be mine, and now she watched me make it, and something eased in her face that I had not known was tight. She did not bow. She only inclined her head the small amount she gives a thing she approves of, and that was worth more to me than the whole kneeling valley, though I would never have said so out loud. They bowed to me a second time, and this time I let them, because this time I had chosen it. Somewhere in the middle of the kneeling, a child was breathing in its mother's arms, easy and slow, and that was the only crown of the night I would have knelt for myself. 2 days after they made me a king, at first light, Mira Brand walked up the mountain path out of the valley. Her luggage was light. There was no rope on her and no shackle. I was not there. Echo told me the shape of it after, and the shape of it was this. By the valley's own law, no prisoner ever walks free, because a single loose mouth in the wrong town could unmake the whole hidden place. Every wolf in that valley could have heard her leave from a mile off and stopped her cold. Not one of them moved. The silence was my consent, and the tribes and Mira knew exactly what it was. Echo came up the path behind her without a sound and put a small bundle into her hands. Inside was a sliver of translucent fang with a bead of yellow fluid sealed in the heart of it, a splinter off something enormous, off the venom tooth of the pale worm, the dragon that does not die. Deadly poison, Echo told her, and the fluid of an immortal thing in the same breath. Refined by the right hands, it might buy back some of the years she had burned. Far to the west, past the border, there was a town of scholars. She was to find someone there who could work it. Mira laughed when she understood, because she understood all of it at once. To live, she had to go west. To go west was to leave the country. And out of the country, there was no one left she could ever tell where this valley lay. I had handed her a cure and a lock in the same palm, and she thanked me for both. I will not pretend it was all mercy. Part of it was the plain fact that a prisoner who died in my keeping would only weaken my hand on the day I finally sat across a table from Duke Ashford, and a grateful woman a country away is a safer thing than a resentful one at your gate. Both were true. I have never seen the use in lying to myself about which parts of a kindness are also arithmetic. There was a message folded in with the fang. It only said that the silver blades had always been third rate. She did not know what it meant. She folded it away anyway, told Echo to carry her thanks back to me, and swore that if we ever met again, she would pay the whole of it back. Then she went up into the mountains under a sky that was finally clearing and was gone. 3 days a king, and mostly what it meant was carrying lumber. I walked the valley with Hazel and laid strength enhancement on whoever stood under the heaviest of it, so a beam that should have taken 4 wolves went up under one, laughing, calling out that the wood had gone light. It holds for 10 days a casting. I told them to spend it on everything that mattered and heal the rest of themselves with rest. Asa took his daughter aside somewhere in the middle of the second day. Hazel still spoke to me the way she always had, easy and blunt, and entirely without ceremony, and by the wolves' old code that had once been the kind of disrespect a warrior did not survive. She tried, the next morning, a stiff and miserable little "my lord," and I thought the poor girl had taken a fever and healed her on the spot. Rose sent her to ask Echo how it was properly done, and Echo, careful of her own particular place at my side, offered a title that fit exactly no one but Echo. In the end, the elders simply gave up, granted Hazel the single standing exception in the whole of their code, and let her go on calling me nothing in particular, which suited both of us. So the valley mended. Smoke rose from cook fires, and nobody flinched at it. A dead king's dungeon lay open and quiet at our door, waiting to be emptied of everything it still held. And I knew, the way you know weather, that it would not stay quiet. Somewhere to the west, a great lord was already writing his own version of what had happened in this valley. And he would not love the news that the thing he had tried to bury under a burned village now wore a crown. And further off than that, past all of it, a man who had once counted my life and found it not worth a year's keep still did not know the account between us had never once closed. But those were the next season's ledgers. That night, I ate at a fire that had waited for me before anyone touched it, in a valley that had made me its king by the light of the homes it had lost. I had spent a long life keeping careful count of everything the world takes from people. For the first time, I was keeping the other kind of book, the one that tallies what can still be handed back. A week into being a king, I found out what kingship actually is. It is not the sword at my hip or the amber stone at my throat. It is 40 people, and the fact that by winter there would not be enough food for all of them. Asa laid it out the way he laid out everything plainly. The little forest could not feed 40 by hunting. Every year they had tried wheat, and every year the harvest came up thinner, the ground giving less until it gave almost nothing. This land could carry 40 mouths and not one more, and only while the dungeon at their door kept spilling meat. That was the problem folded inside the problem. The azure end had always fed them, but the azure end had lost its king, a toad the size of a war tent that I had dropped myself in a single charge, and a dungeon that loses its king collapses the way a bridge drops when you pull the keystone. By every rule they knew, the cave that fed them should already have been dying. It wasn't. A full week on, it stood. Asa had noticed. He turned it over aloud, unable to make it add up, and asked me the question he plainly did not expect an answer to. Where would a man even find a new king for a top-ranked dungeon? I told him I had brought one back in my pack. I let that sit, because it deserved a moment of sitting. Then, I gave them the rest. The pale worm, the immortal serpent dragon I had faced in the deep of the demon's descent, the thing no blade or fire or miracle was supposed to be able to kill. I had not carried its corpse out of that place. I had carried its egg, and a week ago, before I ever climbed this hill, I had walked the azure end down to its deepest floor and set that egg where the old king used to sit. An immortal thing, sleeping at the bottom, holding the whole cave together like a hand closed around a heart. I told them I was sorry for keeping it secret. I had not wanted to hand starving people a hope I could not yet prove. Now I could prove it. The dungeon would hold. The white dragon in its depths was the ground everything else would stand on. Asa was quiet a long moment, and I watched a man who had buried his own line's future reach down and pick it back up. They came up the path at a dead run, the men I had sent down into the azure end to see what it still held. Bell reached me first, a swordsman who had once carried the Duke's colors, spared here, and who now worked the dungeon every day like a man paying down a debt that would never quite clear. "Found it," he said, and pressed a sample into my hand. He swore on the life a dead woman had burned her own years to give him back that the work had been honest. The quality was there, high purity divine silver, imperial stone with the mana packed into it hard as rock. Not a trickle either, but enough in grade and in weight to trade on. Metal feeds no one though, so I asked Bell for the other thing I had sent him after. He handed me a flask of clear water drawn near the dungeon's mouth. Asa wet his fingers, tasted it, and said it was barely a hair off their own spring. That was the piece I had been waiting for. Our wheat had failed because wheat is greedy, I told them. Plant the same crop in the same ground year on year, and it drinks the soil dry, takes and takes, until there is nothing left to take. Rice is a different animal. You flood the field and grow it standing in water, and the water washes the ground and carries the balance back into it. So the same land can feed people for lifetimes. All it asks for is water without end. We had a dungeon that made water without end. We had no seed. So I gave Hazel her first real order as the king's hand, to go and bring rice seed back to the hollow. She dropped to one knee, told me it was as good as done, and went. Gerald had talked himself into believing the worst was behind him. I heard the shape of it afterward, the merchant sitting in his counting room in Milford, tallying what I had taken, telling himself his losses were steep, but his day was not done, that a year would set him right. His shrunken overseer Elmore opened the door, a wolf stepped through it, and Gerald screamed. I did stand at his door, but it was Hazel who carried the terms, and Hazel who plainly enjoyed carrying them. She reminded him, flat and calm, that every coin in his strongboxes already belonged to me, taken in full and simply left under him to sit on. Cooperate, and he could go on holding my money as a deposit he managed in my name. refuse, and he would hold nothing at all. She may have remarked on his thinning hair somewhere in there. He learned that the Milford town chief answered to me now as well, and something went out of him. Then she set a lump of divine silver ore on his desk, and the whole man changed. Rena's shop would appraise it and move it. Gerald would run the trade and take a cut. The fury drained out of his face, and the arithmetic poured in, until a merchant who had sworn he would never lift a finger for me was suddenly delighted to be robbed, so long as he got a percentage of the robbery. Later, on the hill, Hazel asked why I had not simply finished him. A dead enemy is a cost, I told her. A living one, folded into the ledger, is income. A stick alone won't do it. You keep a carrot in the other hand. 2 months, and the valley I had been crowned in stopped looking like a place that had burned. It started small. One channel cut from the dungeon's water down to the nearest dead field, then a second, then a web of them, thin, bright lines threading the whole valley floor, and behind the water came the paddies, squares of flooded ground holding the sky where wheat had shriveled for a generation. Forest leaf raked into heaps and turned until it rotted down to fertilizer. The wolf people lifting heavier and moving faster than their own bodies allowed, because I had lent them the strength to do it, 10 days at a stretch. Grain and tools and seed came up the road from Milford, paid for, with ore going the other way. Gerald bought, Rina sold. The town chief looked in another direction, and every link in that chain believed it was getting the better end of the deal. That is how you know a machine is built right. Everyone feeding it is certain they are the one being fed. 40 people who had been starving under a dying cave were, 2 months on, growing their own food and trading the surplus outward, not rescued, standing on their own feet. There is a particular quiet in watching a thing you drew on a hill actually climb up out of the dirt, and I let myself have it a while. I should have been watching the tree line instead. Somewhere past it, walking toward us on a road nobody had given her, an alchemist was already most of the way to my door. I was not in that town. I heard the shape of this later, the way you hear about a storm in a country you have already left. The alchemist reached the silver blades before she reached me. Her name was Angelina, and she had not come to join my old party. She had come because of me, because of the skill loan, which she wanted to throw against the thing she loved most in the world. She said the true goal of her craft was to prove the impossible, that her golems could do very nearly anything, and so her whole life was the hunt for the one thing they could not. Roland, sweating under a name that had rotted the day I left, offered her the world to sign on. She turned him down flat and moved for the door. She had come for Marcus, she told him, not for a dead party anyone could see was barely functioning without the man who used to hold it up. When he blocked her way and lectured her about manners, she offered him a way to settle it. One match, her golem against his sword. If he won, she would join. Roland was a sword saint. He looked at a girl half his height and a lump of clay no bigger than a house, and he laughed. The small golem jumped. It jumped, borrowed a leaping skill straight out of her, and crossed the room faster than he had braced for, and the first blow rang off him before his stance was set. Then the floor split. A second golem tore up out of the boards like an arm out of a grave and pinned him where he stood, and the first one came down on him, and down again. She told him almost kindly that her golems carried her own skills, and then she called up the large ones. They rose around him the size of houses, and buried the sword saint under so much moving stone that he never once managed to wake the borrowed power his whole legend was built on. When it was done, the celebrated hero of the Silver Blades lay flat on his back on a beer-soaked floor, and the girl was already gathering her things to go. Roland woke aching in a rented bed, with the whole shape of his loss laid out and waiting. He had lost. Worse, he had lost without ever drawing on the thing that made him Roland at all. Elena gave him the rest with a mage's flat practicality. The alchemist had asked for my old belongings, the gear I had left behind the day they threw me away, and Elena, seeing no use for a dead man's things, had simply handed them over. Angelina meant to build a golem that could follow my scent. He went very still. Then he went to the window. From the top of the bell tower, he found her in the streets below, a small figure walking out through the gates with a clay hound nosing along the ground ahead of her, tasting the air, hunting a line. My line. For weeks he had not been able to imagine how a discarded support could have vanished so completely. Now the answer was walking out of town on 4 clay legs, and all he had to do was follow it. They tell me he smiled then, the first true smile since the day his party began to rot. He had found his road to me. 2.5 months after I came to the hollow, the eastern sky filled up with something that had no business existing. A golem, but not the kind that digs a canal. This one stood taller than the houses, taller than the hill, a walking mountain of stone grinding toward the valley where my people were. I sent Hazel to pull everyone clear and went out alone to meet it. 6-fold arms, I told Echo, and 6 invisible arms opened around me. I drew the thing away from the huts and hit it. The first fist cracked its face. The second broke it. The third caved the whole front of its skull inward, and the limbs kept moving, unbothered, because whatever ran, it was not in the head. Then a voice greeted me from up on its shoulder. "Hello there," she called down, as easy as if from a balcony. "I came to pay my respects, but you look busy. Should I come back?" A red-haired girl sat up there with her legs crossed like she had stopped in for tea, watching me try to demolish her creation, entirely unafraid. She folded the giant down as easily as closing a hand, shrank it to the size of a house, and stepped off it onto the grass. "Angelina, alchemist," she said, and put out her hand as if we had met at a party. Properly, this time. She had heard of me from Roland, of all people, and she had walked the whole long way for one thing, my skill loan. I gave her the hard part before she could get comfortable. She knew where the hollow was now. That meant she could never go back to her academy. A place hidden by 40 lives could not let its location walk out of the valley in someone's head. She barely blinked. She had already looked at us, really looked, in the time it took me to punch her golem apart and ride the whole story off the ground. Too much flooded Patty, too few backs to work it. We were drowning in a labor shortage, and she had spent her life building things that never got tired. She would fix it. In return, she wanted safety, a roof, food, land for a workshop, materials, a clean bed, and a string of smaller things she rattled off without stopping to breathe. Everything but the 14th, I told her. The 14th was that she lived together with me. She let it go, for now, in a tone that told me she would raise it again. Asa watched the whole exchange with the face of a man wondering what a girl like that could possibly be made of. I understood the wariness. I was welcoming a stranger into a secret, and part of the welcome was a cage, with the door left politely open. She was useful, she was willing, and she also could not be allowed to leave. All three were true in the same breath. That is usually how the real decisions come. The next morning, the wall we had been breaking our backs against simply came down. Her golems waded into the patties and worked them with a patience no living crew could match. They dug channels dead straight. They tended the branching rice, which had wanted more hands than we owned. They never ate, never tired, never stopped. Asa watched them and said they were plow horses that pulled double and ate nothing. And the wolf people, who had eyed the clay figures like they might bite, were asking for more of them by nightfall. She was worth more than the muscle. Besides, she sat down with the water and did the mathematics of it. The right width for a channel, the right fall, how to lose the least of it back into the ground. I set her to reckoning how much water we were bleeding. For the first time, the hollow was not merely surviving. It was running like a thing that had been designed. I asked her once whether anyone had followed her in. She was proud of the answer. 2 full months she had taken to reach us, looping and doubling back the whole way to shake off any tail. And on the final stretch, she had broken her last golem down to nothing in the peaks, so there would be no trail left to find. She believed that. I nearly believed it too. She was wrong. The man who had trailed her every step of those 2 months stood in the high rocks above the valley and watched her last golem come apart on the final ridge. He had followed on nothing but his own legs and his own patience, and the moment the clay fell open, he understood exactly what it meant. Somewhere below him, in a valley the maps did not know, was the man he had once thrown into a monster's mouth to save a fee. He did not rush down. A man who has already waited 2 months can wait a little longer. I had built a kingdom that could feed itself. I had folded my enemies into it one at a time, until almost no one who wished me harm was left standing outside my ledger. Almost. 2 ranges to the east, a great lord was already sharpening his own account of me, and the crown had only made me a larger mark. And nearer than that, near enough now to see my smoke, a man who had once weighed my whole life against a single year's wages stood in the cold, and finally knew the shape of the valley that held me. I had spent a lifetime counting every debt in the world. I had somehow forgotten to count the one walking downhill toward my door. Roland walked into Duke Ashford's mansion and demanded to be brought before the great lord himself. I was not there. I built the room later out of what the walls remembered and what frightened men repeat, and it reconciles clean enough. He came weather-worn and lean. 2 months of walking hardened into him, but he still spoke like a man who owned the floor he stood on. The butler met him at the threshold, monocle catching the light, and reminded him of the terms. Only 2 things earned a man audience with the Duke: a natural disaster or a popular uprising. Anything smaller was to be handed to the household and forgotten. Roland smiled at that. He said he had found exactly the second thing: a wolf people rebellion. arming in the hills, and he had the proof breathing behind him. He hauled the proof forward by a length of chain. Victor, chief of Milford for 10 years, a man I had quietly kept solvent, dragged the width of the region in handcuffs until the fight was worn clean out of him. He gave his name in a voice like dry paper. He set his seal on the table because his hands still remembered how, even when the rest of him had stopped. Then, prompted, he testified. A wolf man had lived quiet in his town, Victor said. Then a traveler took him under his protection, and after that, the buying started. Supplies by the cartload, food, timber, seed grain, farm tools, and weapons. He said the last word small because Roland had taught him to. I had bought all of it, not 1 ounce of it for a war. Seed grain does not besiege a city, but a grocery list, read out by a shackled man in a lord's hall, sounds like an armory if the room has already decided it wants one. The butler let him finish, then said a strange thing. Master Victor's name had crossed his desk once before, very recently, in a report about 3 of the Duke's private soldiers who had died in the field, one of them never found. Victor answered before he could think to lie. The deaths had been reported to him, he said, by a man named Marcus. The same man had handed over the dead soldiers' belongings for their families. That was the thread that knotted it. Roland leaned in and named me, the traitor from his own party, the traveler shielding the wolfman, the hand behind the dead soldiers. He laid it out like a confession he had rehearsed in the dark for 2 months, and the shape of it was almost elegant, and almost none of it was true. The butler considered the tangle for a long moment. He was not a stupid man. I think he saw the seams in Roland's cloth, but 3 dead soldiers and a coerced witness, and a name attached to both, was more than a household secretary's authority could hold. He straightened his gloves and said the matter was above him. He opened the door to the Duke. Roland went through it swearing under his breath that he would take all of it back, every piece of what he believed I had stolen. He had waited a long time to say it to power that could answer. He never once considered that the man he was accusing had killed the immortal thing at the bottom of the world and walked out unhurried. He was hunting a version of me that had died in a dungeon a season ago. He just hadn't been told yet. A wolfman came up the bank at first light to tell me another patty had died. I went and looked. The stalks had gone soft and gray at the waterline, folding into the water they were supposed to drink. 7 patties I had split the rice into, so no single sickness could take the harvest. This made 5 gone, 2 left standing. Angelina crouched at the edge with her sleeves shoved back and read the dead crop the way other people read a letter. A fungus, she said, that climbs the stalk from the waterline and rots the base out from under it. She named it plainly and gave me the only cure in the same breath. Burn it, all of it today. The channels run separate, so it shouldn't reach the other 2. But you watch those 2 like a debt collector, and the second you see gray, you pull it and you burn that too. The wolf people did not want to. There was still green in that field, still stalks that had done nothing wrong, and they had raised every one of them from a flooded nothing with their own backs. One of them said as much, quiet, that there were healthy plants in there yet. I told them to light it anyway. A sick field is a spreading loss. A burned field is a loss that stops. It is the same arithmetic I have run my whole life. Only the coin was rice this time, and I have never once been wrong about which way it comes out. I made them do it while the dew was still down so the fire would stay where I put it. Hazel stood beside me and watched the smoke stand up off the patty, ears flat under her flaxen hair, and asked me the question she always asks when she is scared. It'll be okay, won't it? It was not a real question. It was a hand reaching for something to hold. So I gave her the true answer, which is not the same as an honest one. It'll be fine. I kept my eyes on the fire. It's our job to say that, no matter what's actually coming. She slapped both her own cheeks hard enough to sting, the way she does when she is deciding to be brave, and said, "Right, that's how it is," and squared up next to me. Echo came to my shoulder and told me softly not to lose heart. I hadn't. I had simply moved the heart somewhere. It couldn't slow my hands. Behind us, 2 months of work stood in the water, canals and patties, and the ore trade humming under it all. 40 people fed for the first time in their lives. I had built something that could keep itself alive. I was standing there doing the sums on 2 patties and a winter when the running started. The lookout came down off the ridge trail so fast he nearly went into the canal. He was young, one of ours, and he had run the fear right out of his legs. Hazel got water into him before he could speak. He knelt, gulped it, and gave the report the way I had drilled them to. Protocol first, even with his heart in his throat. An army was crossing the eastern grasslands, over the mountains, coming down toward us. He had counted banners and given up counting men. More than 500 soldiers, coming for a village of 40. He said one more thing, and it was the thing that stayed with me. The emblem on their shoulders, seen far off through the pass, looked the same as the one on Bell's old gear, Duke Ashford's mark. I filed that where I file everything I cannot use yet. and I kept my face still because a face is the first thing 40 frightened people read. I did not raise my voice. Panic is loud and it loses wars. And I had a village to arm before the mountains gave the enemy back to gravity. I gave the orders flat and fast. Recall Bel and his people from the Azure end. All of them, now. Every blade we owned out of storage and into a hand that could hold it. My house was the command post from this breath forward. Then I turned to Angelina, who had already stood up out of her dead field and was grinning at me like I had handed her a present. I told her what I needed, not a wall of corpses, a wall that held. 500 men stalled on the eastern road, long enough for the rest of us to breathe, and not one of them killed doing it. Oh, that's the hard version. She was already walking, already delighted. Everybody wants the hard version. I let her go. I had spent months folding enemies into my ledger one at a time instead of burying them, because a dead man pays you nothing and a live one can be made to work. Now, I was going to ask that same principle to hold against an army, and I did not know yet if it would. The valley moved. 40 people who had been farmers an hour ago picked up iron, outnumbered better than 10 to 1, and I stood in the middle of it counting angles instead of odds, because odds were the one number in that whole valley I refused to look at directly. I felt the rest of it happen at the edge of my sensing, the way you feel a far door slam through the floor of a house. I was not on that road. I had chosen to stand somewhere else and wait for my own enemy, and holding still while I tracked 500 men marching on my people, pulled every wire in me tight. I trusted the ones I had sent. I made myself trust them. Duke Ashford's private army came down out of the pass in good order, helmets and shoulder guards and chainmail, a company cannon riding in the middle of the column. Even his own soldiers didn't believe in this war. Word came back afterward that they had muttered the whole march down, squinting at the little farming backwater ahead of them, asking each other where exactly the rebel horde was supposed to be hiding. Then the ground answered them. The earth on the road bulged, split, and stood up. A giant climbed out of it, white as fired porcelain, taller than any house in Milford, taller than the hill behind it, dust grinding off its shoulders as it rose to its full height and simply planted itself across the line of march. The column stopped like a struck animal, 500 trained men, and every one of them went still at once, because there is a thing that lives in the back of a soldier's head from childhood, a fairy tale thing, an earthen giant on the road, and here it was in daylight with the sun on its shoulders. The front ranks gave ground without being told. Somewhere a captain found his voice and started shouting about the cannon, about a giant that intelligence swore moved fast, about holding the line until the gun could fire. They held a line against a statue. That was the whole trick, and it was beautiful. The giant did not charge. It did not crush anyone. It stood in the road being impossible, and an army that had marched to put down farmers spent itself readying for a monster that had no intention of taking a single step. Angelina was up a tree at the tree line, with her knees drawn to her chin, steering the whole mountain of stone with the small movements of one hand, and she was the only one on that field not enjoying herself. They panic, then they reform fast. They're better than they look. She said it half to me, to the sensing thread she knew I had on her. Not letting any of them die. That's the hard part, Marcus. But this one's mine. I've got it. She had it. One golem, one girl in a tree, 500 of the Duke's finest frozen on the road doing nothing at all, a wall that held and did not kill. I had asked for the impossible version, and my engineer had built it out of clay and nerve. I let myself have exactly one breath of that. Then the other end of my sensing went cold, because the road was never where the real cruelty was headed. While the army stood in the road being fooled, the true blade came into Milford by the front gate, and no golem was standing there to meet it. The townsfolk had gathered in the square the way people do when they are frightened and want company for it. The rumor had already run the length of the town. The wolf people, and Hazel most of all, were gathering to take their revenge on humankind. And every human in Milford was on the list. They stood trading that poison back and forth in the sun. Rena cut through it. She told them to stop gossiping like old women at a well and go pack their homes while they still had the time, because whatever was coming was not going to wait for them to finish the sentence. Then it came, and it did not wait. The White Phoenix Knights rode into the square, one of the 7 royal orders, the Divine Speed Unit, heavy armor, and cold discipline, and their leader did not dismount to explain himself. He announced from the saddle that a demi-human rebellion had been confirmed by a witness, that this town had chosen the side of animals, and that they had come to begin the normalization. Normalization. Their word for what they do to any human who dares to treat a demi-human as a person. It is an old word in that order, and it has a great many quiet graves behind it. Gerald heard the market die in that one word, and did the only thing his whole life had trained him to do. He stepped forward to defend the trade he had sunk every coin into. He waved his soft hands and laughed the laugh he uses on taxmen, and said there were no schemes here, only a little trouble with some strays. Nothing worth a royal order's time. Surely they could all be reasonable. The night leader answered him with a blow, and Gerald went down and did not get up. Rena was already moving. She threw herself in and dragged him back out of the square by his coat, while the knights led her, because a fat merchant on the ground was no longer their business. But she was pulling a gravely hurt man. He was breathing, and he would go on breathing, and one arm hung off him useless and wrong, and the trade he had bled to protect was worth exactly nothing. Now that the men in white had decided a collaborator was a collaborator whatever color his skin, they had not come to Milford to fight. They had come to teach it, to make an example patient enough that no one for 100 miles would ever again sell bread to a thing with ears. And I was 2 places away from all of it. The army stalled on the eastern road with Angelina's giant, Milford opening under the knights with only Rena and a wounded man in the dust. And somewhere between me and my own front door, a man who had walked 2 months on foot to reach me, closing the last of the distance while both other fires drew every eye but mine. 3 fronts, all lit at once. Every debt I had in the world come due in the same hour, and me standing at the center of it with a sword I had not yet drawn, counting the seconds until the first of them reached me. I felt him a breath before he reached me. A smear of speed came across the flat ground, faster than a man has any business moving, and then the air beside my head split open, and a thin line of cold drew itself along my cheek. Roland had found me. He said my name the way you read out a debt you have come to collect. 2 months on foot through mountains and swamp to reach this exact patch of dry grass, and here he was, hollow-eyed, wind-burned, the fine armor gone the color of the road. He had woken Sword Saint. When he moved, he did not blur. He simply stopped being anywhere the eye could hold, and the wind carried the sound of him a half-second late. His fastest cut came for my throat. One of my golems caught it, and the force flung the giant sideways like a kicked stool. The graze on my cheek closed before the blood could finish welling. Seraph's blessing does not ask permission. It just decides the wound never happened. Roland saw it heal and went white. He came again, and each time his edge found me, it found nothing that stayed. A shallow line opened along my shoulder and sealed itself in the same instant. No scar, no opening, nothing for him to build on. He hammered at me like a man trying to break down a door that had already been walled up behind him. Learn anything? I asked. He snarled something about the old party, that Gordon had shut himself in a rented room, frightened of his own shadow, that Elena drifted cafe to cafe, now doing nothing with the rest of her life, that Tina had simply walked off 3 months ago and never come back. The healer whose mending, he admitted through his teeth, had never once been this fast, this clean, this final. The silver blades had come apart the season I left. He blamed me for that too. Then he said the thing he had walked 2 months to say, that he had come to take all of it back. Everything I stole from him. I told him I was glad. I did not say it to be cruel. I said it because it was true, and because the truth of it had crept up on me the way cold water finds a crack. He had not changed, not 1 degree. The same appetite, the same certainty that the world had shorted him, the same hand reaching for the throat of anyone who had more. 2 months of walking, and he had arrived exactly the man who left. And what I felt, watching him, was not fear. It was relief. That was the part that unsettled me. Somewhere under the fight, I had been braced to meet someone I no longer recognized, and instead, I got the man I already had solved down to the last line. And the ease of it, the plain relief of it, told me something about my own wound I did not much want to look at. For a long time, I had wondered if the fault had been mine, if I had been quieter, smaller, more useful, whether the whole thing might have gone another way. His sameness was the receipt that said it never was. There was nothing I could have done. There had never been anything I could have done. That should have felt like being freed. Instead, it sat in my chest like a stone I had been carrying so long I had stopped noticing the weight, and only felt it now that a stranger had come 2 months on foot to set it down for me. He read the glad on my face as contempt, which was near enough, and it drove him past reason, which was fine. Reason was the last thing between him and the flaw I had already found. Sword Saint runs flat. It cuts on one long horizontal line and it can never fall like a clean downward stroke because the skill outruns the man riding it. I had known that longer than he had owned the skill. I let him keep swinging. I wanted to see the rest. There was a problem with him, and I chewed on it while I let his blade skate off my healing. Sword Saint outruns its own user's sight. That is its curse. To steer it, a man needs Hawk's Eye, the perception skill that catches the world up to the speed. And I had lent Roland that eye once, back when we were something other than this. He did not have it now, so how was he holding this speed without blinding himself on it? The answer was in the way he moved. Not smooth, overrun. A body pushed past the line where pain should have stopped it, and not stopping, because something had switched the pain off. You drowned it, I said. The pain and the limit under it. You are running on a battle draft, a cursed brew, the forbidden kind. It drinks a man's pain and tears out the inner governor that keeps a body from destroying itself, so he can charge past his own breaking point, and it charges him for every step at a rate that ends in only one place. It is not medicine. It is a curse you swallow on purpose. He hated being read. He spat a taunt and loosed a crossbow bolt at me, the head of it wet and dark with poison. I called up the deep frost, the old cold divine age magic, the same I had used to end a thing far worse than Roland. It caught the bolt in the air and hung it there in a fist of ice, and it climbed down and locked his forward boot to the ground. He tore free without slowing, ripping the boot away inside its shell of frost, and came on lurching and lopsided and grinning through it, because the draft would not let him feel the ankle he had just wrecked. He boasted then of the hell he had crossed chasing Angelina across the country, mountains and swamps, and long nights, losing her a dozen times, and each time drowning the hurt and catching up on Sword Saint. All that suffering, he said, had forged him. He had earned this. He deserved to be the one who won and took everything, and dead weight like me, top-ranked, he sneered, only by lying on the floor while better men bled, deserved to hand it over. He threw his whole body into one last strike. It broke against my golem, whose stone I had hardened with black obsidian, Gordon's old skill, into something his best could not so much as chip, and I stood there untouched and showed him, one at a time, unhurried, the way you turn a ledger to face the man across the desk, the healing that erased every cut he landed, the deep frost that stole the air from his lungs, the golem that ate his strongest blow, black obsidian under its skin, so his best strike met a wall harder than mountain rock. Every power he had spent 2 months and his own body chasing, I was holding all at once, and none of it had cost me a betrayal to get. Every one of these would have been yours, I told him. The shield, the mending that will not let a wound stay, the old magic, all of it, and more you never saw. It was going to be yours. You were the leader. I would have handed it up to you the way I handed you everything else, if you had not decided to kill me, if you had not tried to kill the others while the healer begged you not to. You did not lose this to me, Roland. You threw it into the dark with your own 2 hands, and then you walked 2 months to blame the man who picked it up. He came apart at that, screamed that if he could not tear it back out of me, he was already as good as dead, which, though he did not know it, the draft had already decided. I raised my right hand toward him. There was one thing still sitting in his grip, and it was time to take it back. Last, I said, I collect what is still yours to lose. If you hate that, then stop me. I could have ended it right there. I want to be honest about that. I had him solved, cornered, one move from finished, and instead I was drawing it out, taking his pride down plank by plank, making him watch. I told myself it was study. Some of it was study. The rest of it stood one short step from the exact cruelty I had spent this whole year swearing I was better than, and I knew it, and I kept going anyway. I was not standing in Milford. I felt the shape of it at the edge of my sensing while I worked, and the rest the survivors gave me after, and this is how it went. The Knights had brought 36 blades into the town under their word for it, normalization, which meant cutting down any human who dared treat a wolf person as a person. 18 wolf folk stood against them in the street, Hazel at the front, and the captain had done his homework. His spear was painted with an alchemical brew made to foul mana, and when it caught Hazel's right claw, it snarled the flow dead and left the whole arm hanging useless at her side. He lectured her while she stood there half crippled. He called the wolf people a low race, pride poisoned, a people whose every boast ended in somebody else's wound. He said he had never once told them to die, only never to interfere with the goodwill of their betters. He mocked their dead, the ancestors who fell in old territory wars, and rewrote every one of them into a villain. And then he goaded her to strike first so the killing could be called justice. And Hazel, shaking with it, did not strike, because a wolf leader who spends her pack to save her own pride has already lost by the creed she lives on. Behind her stood 17 warriors who had only learned to hold weapons a few months ago. If she let go now, some of them died. So she swallowed the whole of his cruelty and held her ground, thinking of the pack at her back and the king who had trusted her to hold this street, and she would not betray that trust. She said as much, low, more to herself than to him. She would not. She would not. He raised the spear to finish her, and 3 clay jars came out of nowhere and burst across his helmet. Rena had kicked open the shutter of a liquor store and come out into the open with her arms full of them, hurling and shouting, telling the silver-shined little sneak that she did not know the whole of this quarrel, but she knew for certain she did not like him. The captain turned his blade on Rena. He drew a short sword and threw it, straight and hard, meaning to put her in the dirt for good. And Gerald, fat, cowardly, wounded Gerald, one arm already hanging dead from the square, threw himself across her and shoved her clear and took the fall himself. He cracked his head on the cobbles and lay there gasping. Word came back that all he said, once he had the breath, was that now they were square. The favor was repaid. They were even. Beside them, Hazel moved. She took a broken jar and poured the spilled liquor straight over her ruined arm, over the wound, washing the mana-fouling toxin out of it. The captain sneered that snarled mana made standing impossible. Never mind fighting. Then her skill woke, and the whole street turned gold. The Fang Wolf came up her arms in shaped light, clawed gauntlets of pure mana, a mantle of golden fur blazing off her shoulders. And it did not stop where it had ever stopped before. It kept climbing. A second tail rose behind her real one, a tail made of nothing but golden mana, burning so bright the shopfronts threw hard shadows the wrong way, and the dust in the air lit up like sparks hanging still. The captain's voice cracked as he watched it form. He said it was impossible. He said an endemic skill draws on the spirits of a living land, and this was a dead, withered plain, and no such power could bloom here. He was wrong about the land, and he was wrong about what feeds her. Her skill does not burn hottest for herself. It burns hottest when she fights for someone else, and she had a whole street of someone else's at her back, and the number climbing behind her eyes was not one she was measuring for pride. It was the count of people she could still keep breathing. She spoke once, low, to no one, and to all of them at once. A wolf warrior's pride, she said, and will, and strength. The enemy is only ever the thing standing in front of us. Then she was among the knights before the captain finished being afraid. 3 of them were down before they read her as a threat, and she had not slowed. Her claws took his short sword out of the air and shattered it into bright falling pieces. And the arm that had hung dead a minute ago moved like it had never known the toxin at all. And into the space, her speed tore open. Her 17 warriors dragged themselves up off the ground, leaning on each other, wounded and lit from the reflected gold of her, taking their weapons back into their hands one by one. And then the townsfolk came. They poured out of the shops and the alley mouths with kitchen knives and farm tools and split firewood. Ordinary Milford people who a day ago had stood in their doorways, trading the rumor that the wolves meant them harm, and had decided, watching a poisoned wolf girl take a spear rather than spend the people at her back, that they had believed the wrong story. They filled the street behind Rena and the wolves until, all at once, it was the knights who were the fewer, and the arithmetic of the whole day turned over in a single minute. The horses balked at the crowd. Trained war horses shied and refused the wall of people, and the charge the captain called for died under him before it started. The knights broke. They turned and ran, and they left men behind them in the dust, taken, bound, not killed. On either side of that street, when the counting was done, not one person had died. Hazel had held it exactly the way I had gambled she would. She tried to chase the fleeing knights. She got a dozen strides, and the toxin still in her blood caught up with the effort all at once, and she went down onto the cobbles with nothing left to give. Rena got to her first, begged a strip of cloth off a villager, and bound the arm, scolding her the whole time for washing a wound out with liquor. Hazel said she had no love for this town, but she would not stand in the way of anyone trying to live. Her 17 warriors closed a ring around the 2 of them and would not be moved. Then the ground in the north stood up. A pillar of churned earth tore straight into the sky beyond the rooftops, taller than anything in Milford, and the whole street went quiet and turned to look at it. The people who had just won their fight stared north with the wind draining out of their faces, because whatever was throwing up a column of earth that size was a scale past anything they had just survived. That was my battle, writing itself on the sky for the whole town to read. Back on my own front, I closed my hand on Sword Saint to take it. Skill loan needs one thing fixed and clean, a single skill, held still long enough for the claim to run. I had done it 100 times. I brought up the sixfold arms and the space leap and shadowless, the stealth skill that had grown into something else after I took Seraph's blessing into myself. And I reached in the way I had planned the whole fight to reach in, and I took hold of the skill that had always, underneath, been mine, and it would not come. For one breath, the wrongness of it stopped me flat. The draft had done more than numb him. Poured down past all reason, drink after drink, it was rotting the mana in him and warping the skill on top of it. Sword Saint twisting into something snarled and unstable. No longer the clean shape the claim knew how to grip. I could not reclaim a corrupted thing, not as it stood. The draft was a wall thrown up between me and the debt, and it had been thrown up by his own hand, the same as everything else he had lost. Roland felt none of it. He was drinking again, past steering, hacking at me in wild broken arcs with a voice that had come apart into noise, screaming at me to die, to give it back. The man was burning himself down to the wick to reach me, and the cruelest part was that the fire consuming him was the one thing in this fight I had no hand in lighting. Echo, steady at my shoulder through all of it, told me quietly not to lose the thread of who I was. I had not, but the study was over. I let the plan go. If I could not go through the skill, I would go through the wall, and the shape of how had already begun to settle in the back of my mind, cold and simple, and entirely mine, a card I was not ready to turn over yet. I see, I said. All right, Roland, then we settle this the clean way. He was still on his feet, swaying, corrupted, doomed and not knowing it, but standing. His knights were routed in Milford, and his army was frozen on the northern road, and every borrowed thing he had leaned on was coming down around him at once, and still he stood in front of me with a blade, one wall short of the reckoning he had walked 2 months to find. I set my feet, and I let him come. He came at me screaming, and there were no words left in it. Roland had walked 2 months of mountains and swamps and dark to reach this field, and now that he finally had me, he threw the whole of himself forward at once. Sword Saint was awake in his hand, the skill I had lent him and never once been given back, and it drove his blade past where the eye could hold it. I did not try to hold it. I opened the subspace rift and let his fastest cuts fall through into nothing, and the ones that did not fall, I met with the diamond barrier and let them break there instead of on me. The deep frost took his arm, divine age ice, the kind that freezes a whole field at a breath. It climbed his sword arm and locked it stiff at the elbow, and any man alive would have stopped there and cradled it and begged for a healer. He did not stop. He rode the freeze. He turned the locked arm into an axle and spun his whole body around it, and the blade came off that spin faster than before, a flat screaming arc with all his weight behind it. He had no thought left to steer it. He had only the draft. That was the whole shape of him, and it had always been the whole shape of him. When the cost came, drink past it. When the pain came, drown it, feel nothing, and call the numbness strength. I gave ground with the space leap, folding the distance between one of his cuts and the next, so the blade closed on empty frost. And for the length of that breath, I let myself go back to the beginning of us. We had met as 2 cast-offs. That was the truth under all of it. 2 boys nobody wanted, each carrying the one rare thing that surfaces in a handful of people in a whole generation, a unique skill. His made a sword move faster than sight. Mine was the strange, unlucky one, the one everybody laughed at before they learned what it did. We found each other because we were the only 2 like us in that town, and I had thought for about a year that it meant something. Then he learned what my skill was, and a nobody like me, he told me, had no right to refuse the man who could make him useful. He pressed me into his party the way you press a coin into a slot. I lent him Hawk's Eye once, so his blade would land where his eye told it to. I lent him everything in the end. He built a whole legend on the loans, and he never once thought of them as loans, because a thing you take from a nobody was never really borrowed at all. He hammered on the diamond barrier now, both hands, the frozen arm and the free one, over and over against a wall he could not crack. His hands were tearing on it. I could see it happening and he could not feel it happening, and he did not stop, because stopping meant standing still long enough to understand what was standing in front of him. That was the part that was hard to watch. Not the speed, not the ruin of his body, the refusal. A man will do almost anything before he will look at the one fact that unmakes him. He had built his whole life on the idea that he was the strong one, and I was the dead weight he generously carried. And every blow he threw against that barrier was another blow against the truth. He would rather beat his own hands to nothing than let the thought in. so he beat them to nothing. I had healed the little he managed to land on me in the same instant he landed it. Seraph's blessing closed each graze before the blood could well, no scar, no opening. He had gone white the first time he saw it, a mend faster and cleaner than any his own healer had ever given him. And somewhere in there, he must have understood that too, and refused it along with all the rest. Echo was at my shoulder, steady, the way she had been the whole fight. She did not tell me to end it, and she did not tell me to spare him. She only kept me near the thread of who I was, so that whatever I did next, I would do it as myself and not as him. I let Roland keep swinging. I was not tired. I had never been going to beat him on speed. I had known that before he found the valley, before he drank the first mouthful of that cursed brew. I was going to beat him on a plan I had set down so long ago, I had stopped thinking of it as a plan. The last dungeon we ever cleared together was called the Demon's Descent, top rank. Its air itself was poison. You did not fight a monster to die in that place. You simply breathed, and it killed you slowly for breathing. To survive one delve into it, I had layered 17 separate poison resistances onto my own body, one over another, until nothing that touched my blood could touch me. He had walked through that poisoned air on my resistances the same way he walked through everything else on my skills, and he had come out the far side and called it his own triumph, and never once asked why the air did not kill him. I had never taken them off. All these years later, they were still there, layered under my skin, 17 of them, waiting. I had spent the whole fight looking like a man on the back foot, weathering, giving ground, letting him spend himself. It was the only role I have ever been good at, the one nobody watches. He thought he was pushing me to the edge. He was walking, step by step, exactly where I had built the ground to hold him. He wound up for another strike, screaming, doomed and certain he was winning. The blade came around off that frozen axle one more time, all his weight and none of his mind behind it, straight for my face. There is an ending that fits two men like us, I told him, though I doubt he heard the words through what he had become. Do you remember the last dungeon we ever cleared? I stopped giving ground. I raised my open right hand and I let him come. His blade came for my face. I let it. I did not step. I did not block. I woke the all-reaching palm, the skill that lets me reach into the shape of my own powers and stretch them past their own edges. And I spread every one of those 17 resistances out through my open hand and laid them over him like a sheet dropped over a fire. The draft in his blood had one job, and it was to hold his pain in a room he never had to open. My resistances found that brew and canceled it, snuffed it. In the space of a single heartbeat, every scrap of pain the draft had been carrying for him came due at once. The wrecked ankle he had torn free of the frost and run on for an hour, the shredded hands, the arm frozen at the elbow, the 2 months of a body driven past every breaking point and told to feel none of it. All of it came home. There was no blow in it. I did not strike him. I want that understood because it is the whole of the thing. I never laid a hand on him to bring him down. I only stopped the medicine that was letting him do this to himself. Everything that happened next, he had already done. I merely let him feel that he had done it. His blade stopped a finger's width from my cheek, and it stopped because his whole body seized. The scream changed. It stopped being fury and became the sound a man makes when a lifetime of drowned agony surfaces in one breath. The frozen arm, the shredded hands, the ankle he had run a battle on and never felt, all of it arrived at the same door at the same moment and came through together. And in that one clear second, with the numbness torn off him, his reason came back into his eyes. He was there again, not the beast on the draft, but Roland, the boy from that town, looking at the field around him for the first time. He saw the ice he could not have made. He saw the barrier he could not have broken. He saw the skills stacked against him, every one of them a thing that had once run through his own hands and been thrown away. And somewhere behind his eyes, the arithmetic he had refused to do for a decade finished itself all at once. Every power he had ever leaned on had been mine. He had never been strong. He had only been the man standing closest to me while I paid for him, and the bill for all of it had been quietly compounding the entire time, and it had come due the moment I stopped paying. I could see the thought reach him. I had spent years imagining what his face would do at this exact moment, and now that it was in front of me, it was not triumph I felt watching it. It was something closer to grief, because I knew what he was seeing. He was seeing every jeer he had thrown at the dead weight in his party come back with the tag still on it. Mine, all of it mine. And he was understanding that the words he had used to make me small had been, the whole time, an inventory of everything he owed me. There is a particular horror in learning that the person you spent your life despising was the only reason you were ever anything at all. For one clear second, he had to hold all of it. Then, his body could not hold anything. His mouth worked. He was trying to find the shape of an apology, or a bargain, or a curse. I do not think even he knew which. And the sword fell out of his ruined hand and rang on the frozen ground before any of it came. "Wait," he said. It was the only word he had. He had walked 2 months to take everything back. And at the end of it, with clarity returned to him for the last time, all he could find was a single word begging me to hold the moment still. I had heard that word from the other side once. The day they cast me out, the day I asked them to reconsider what they were doing, I had said something very close to it, and the answer they gave me back then was the answer I gave him now. "It's already too late," I told him. I said it the way you close a ledger. No heat in it. It was only the truth, and it had been the truth the whole time. And the cruelty was never in my saying it. The cruelty was that he had spent 10 years making it true and had only just now learned how to read. He went down, all the way down, folded onto the frost, wrung empty by the weight of everything he had spent his whole life refusing to feel. The fight was over. It had been over, in a way, before it started. He simply had not known. He knelt on the grass with his voice gone, and I walked over and took Sword Saint back. The draft had rotted it. All fight, the skill had been warped in his grip, snarled and corrupted, so that when I had reached to reclaim it earlier, the claim found nothing clean to close on. That was gone now. With the brew cancelled, the system corrected the warping. The tangled mana settled back into its true shape, and Sword Saint answered me the way a loaned thing answers the one who owns it. The debt was called in. I took the skill out of the debtor's hands entire, and in mine, it did not just return, it woke into something greater. It evolved. Sword Saint became the divine blade, the threefold radiance, and the light of it came up along the edge of my treasure sword in 3 clean bands, cold and steady, brighter than anything Roland's frenzy had ever thrown off. In his grip, it had only ever gone flat and fast, outrunning its own rider. In mine, it lay still and certain, a blade that would go exactly where it was sent and no further. It settled into me the way a thing comes back to the shelf it was made for. It had always been mine. It had only been out on loan. His ledger crashed at the same moment. Every skill point he had ever held was driven down to the deepest floor the system will allow, hundreds of millions deep into the red, and there it locked. From this hour on, any strength he ever earned again would be seized on the spot against what he owed, forever, until a debt that size was paid, which it never would be. I could have killed him. It would have been cleaner. A dead man settles nothing, though. A dead man is a thing you have finished thinking about. I did not want him finished. I wanted him alive and emptied and permanently in arrears. A loan I would go on collecting for the rest of his life. That is the heavier sentence. A corpse forgets. A debtor wakes to it every morning. He lifted his head and told the frost softly that it was a lie, that it had to be a lie. I did not answer him. It was not a lie, and he already knew it was not, and there was nothing in it for either of us to argue. Echo let out a breath beside me and said nothing, which was her way of saying I had stayed on the right side of the line. I had wondered, near the end, whether I would. I had held the whole fight one step from cruelty and known it. But this was not that. I had not tortured him, and I had not gloated over him. I had only stopped paying his bills and let the arithmetic land where it had always been going to land. The war was not over. I reached down and got a fistful of the fallen man's collar, and I opened the space leap wide enough to carry 2. We came out of the leap into Milford, and I read the whole street in the first second, the way I read a field. The White Phoenix Knights were beaten, turned back, their formation broken, 10 of them taken and bound at the roadside instead of run down. And on the ground, no one, not one body, wolf or human. The thing I had most hoped for and least dared to count on had held. Hazel was down on the cobbles, where the toxin had finally caught up with her, arm bound in a strip of begged cloth, grayed and drained to nothing. Her 17 warriors ringed close around her. She looked up at me and tried, at once, to hand the whole thing away. The knights were turned back, she told me. 10 prisoners taken, and no one dead on either side, but only because Rena and the townsfolk had come in and stood with them. She said the last part fast, the way she said anything that might sound like she was claiming something. Rena had a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, and cut in that Hazel could see for herself. And why else would she have wound this many good bandages around a pack of wolves if the girl had not earned every strip? Around them, the proof of it was already turning warm. Wolf folk and townspeople were trading jokes over the bandaging, the wolves begging to carry their wounds home as medals, the town telling them bandages get washed and reused, so hand them back. A day ago, these same people would not stand on the same side of a street. The town of Milford had driven the wolf people off this land generations gone, settled onto it, and hunted a starving wolf girl through it for the crime of being born. Now those same townsmen were arguing with those same wolves over who got to keep a strip of cloth. I had watched, through my sensing, the whole arithmetic of it turn over in a single afternoon, and I trusted it more than I would have trusted a treaty, because nobody had ordered it. They had simply seen a poisoned girl take a spear rather than spend her people, and they had decided, on their own, what side of the street they wanted to be on. I crouched to her level so she would have to hear me. "You did better than I hoped, Hazel," I said. She started to shake her head, so I gave her the only question that mattered. Had she fought the way the wolf people are meant to fight? Had she spent her strength for others and not for her own pride? She had. That was the whole victory, and she did not understand yet how large a thing she had prevented. The knights were never the real danger here. The real danger was wolf and human turning on each other in this street and hating each other for 100 years after, and she had stood there poisoned and taken a spear rather than let it start. She had kept the worst thing from happening. Everything else was just the fighting. I had built a doctrine out of that over these last months and drilled it into everyone who followed me. Take the enemy, do not slaughter him. A captive can be answered for. A corpse only breeds the next war. It is an easy thing to say and a very hard thing to hold when the man in front of you has come to burn your home. Hazel had held it while a knight crippled her arm and mocked her dead ancestors and dared her to strike first. Grown soldiers break under less. She had been a wage-cheated girl scavenging a puddle the first day I saw her, and today she had held a line I was not sure I could have held myself. I told her that, more or less, and watched her not know where to put it. The fallen weight in my other hand stirred. The knights bound captives went still when they saw who I was holding by the collar, and none of them said a word. Then I felt the north pull at me again, the thing that had not gone anywhere while all of this happened. Angelina was still out there alone, her one colossal golem walling a whole marching army against the road, holding over 500 men in place without a single death, and she had been holding them for far too long. The Duke's army had not moved and had not broken. It was simply waiting, the way a held breath waits. The debt behind me was paid in full. The one ahead of me had not even been opened. I stood and looked at Hazel and told her the last of it plainly. Next we would go and stop the Lord's army. That was my work now, as the Wolf People's king. She was coming, and so was the broken man at the end of my arm. I had one more use for him yet. Then I turned north, toward the last front, and the threefold radiance burned quiet and cold at my hip, and I began to walk. The world folded shut and opened again on dust and iron. We came out of the space leap onto the war road with the sun straight overhead, and I saw at once how close it had run. Angelina had held them alone, 3 great golems and 4 smaller ones, worked off her own mana until the seams of them cracked, and past the last of the golems stood the army, over 500 men in chainmail and shoulder guards, stalled on the dry grassland below the pass because one tired young woman had refused to let them through. She sat high on the shoulder of the largest golem, small and gray-faced, and when she saw me, her whole body sagged. Back in Milford, Gerald had called after me to mend his arm before I left. I had told him it would keep. Some debts you settle in order. Saved, she breathed down at me. Thank you. I told her she had done better than I had any right to ask, and promised to send something sweet up the mountain to her later, and meant it. Then the golems she had driven so hard simply stopped. One by one, they folded down into heaps of dead clay, their work finished, and she let herself slump against the cold stone shoulder and breathe. That left me standing between the army and everything behind it. The commander of the column found me fast, a lone man in plain travel clothes, soot-marked, no armor, one hand loose on a bound prisoner, and a small wolf girl at his side. And the golems gone still the very instant I arrived. He drew the obvious line between those two facts and shouted the order. The whole front rank turned from the dead golems and came at me instead. I drew the sword. It was the dwarf-forged blade I had carried up out of the burned valley, and along its edge now ran 3 cold bands of light, braided close, the reclaimed skill grown past anything it had ever been, settled at last into the thing the old stories called the threefold radiance. One of the 3 was nothing but speed. The first men reached me swinging. I let them. I stood where I was and did not step back, and their blades came down through the space where I stood and came apart. Every weapon in that front rank sheared clean in the swing, cut through at the middle before it ever finished the arc, so that a dozen men stumbled forward, holding hilts with nothing on the end of them. To their eyes, the strokes had passed straight through my body and left me standing. To mine, I had only moved first and cut first in the sliver of time before their arms caught up to the thought. I dodged, I told the nearest of them, into the silence dropping over the rank. That is all it was. Then I raised the sword to the flat noon sky, and the sky answered. Above me, the air filled with light, hundreds of thin silver shapes, each one the ghost of a blade, hanging over the army in a slow bright canopy that threw its own cold shine down across 500 upturned faces. The dust stopped moving. The whole road went quiet under it. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the silver canopy came down. The true heart of the threefold radiance was never the speed. The speed was only the door. Behind it lay two things the old tales had folded into legend. A few clear seconds of sight into the moment just ahead, and this. Hundreds of blades shaped from raw mana, each one thinking for itself, each one mine without my having to spend a thought to steer it. I read the next few seconds the way another man reads a page, and I gave the swarm a single word. Disarm them. They fell on the army like a wind made of knives and touched no skin. A blade for every soldier, flicking the sword or the spear out of each man's grip and spinning it off into the dust, so fast and so many that the front simply came apart into 500 empty hands. Men screamed that the swords were moving on their own. They were right, and there was nothing they could do about it. The captain kept his head longer than the rest. He fell back on the archers and ordered the crossbows up. Loose all at once, he shouted. Make a pincushion of the man on the road. The volley went up in a black sheet. Not one bolt landed. My blades met them in the air and broke every single one. 100 small, bright collisions above the ranks, and the splinters rained down harmless on the men who had fired them. After that, the archers broke too. Only about a fifth of the whole army still held any shape at all. Behind me, the broken man made a sound. I did not turn, but I knew what it was. For one clear moment, his ruined mind had cleared enough to understand what he was looking at. That this canopy of living blades, this thing unmaking an army without spilling a single cup of blood, was Sword Saint, the plain skill, the one he had held in his own two hands for years and called too simple to matter, and thrown away, and never once seen the bottom of. He had stood on this exact height and stepped off it, and he was only now, bound and emptied at the end of my arm, being shown how far down he had fallen. Then I put him out of my mind again and went back to the work. The fifth that still held together had been holding for a reason. They split their ranks down the middle, clean and drilled, and behind them sat the cannons, a row of wheeled iron mouths already swung round and aimed up the road at me. Grape shot at that range would not much care how many blades I owned. I did not send the swarm. I had something faster to hand. Hazel, I said, they are yours? She had been quiet at my shoulder the whole time, spent and gray from the toxin still working through her, her arm bound. She was tired enough to fall. She went anyway. Gold bloomed up her arms in a rush, the fang wolf regalia waking, a mantle of shaped light closing over her small frame, claws and fangs of pure gold. And she crossed the ground between us, and the guns faster than the crews could turn. Do not get in Marcus's way, she told them, once, and then she was among the cannons. She did not touch the men. She went for the wheels. One after another, she tore them out from under the iron, ripped the axles clean, and left the barrels nose down and dead in the dirt. A whole battery unmade in the space of a few breaths. Then the gold guttered out of her, spent again, and she came back to my side breathing hard, and set herself between me and the enemy, as if she were the one guarding me. I let her think so. It was good for her. Now the army had nothing left to throw, and knew it. That was the moment to stop being a storm and start being a door. I split my mind across every skill I held at once. The sight, the 6 unseen arms, the leap, the silent casting, the endless well of mana, the deep frost, and I poured all of them into one shape. Out of the dry ground between me and the army, the ice came up. Not a wall, a bridge. It rose in a long arched curve over the heads of the soldiers, pale and translucent and ribbed like the spine of some vast serpent, sweeping up from the road at my feet toward the rise where the army's masters waited. The arched back of the pale worm, built out of cold and thrown clean across 500 men who had come to burn a village. The soldiers under it stopped moving. There is a kind of power a man can argue with, and a kind he cannot. and the second kind ends arguments. Nobody charges a bridge of ice thrown up out of nothing by the man who has just eaten their army. At the far end of it, back behind the last of his ranks, sat the one I had come the whole way to reach. An old man on a warhorse, straight-backed, unbothered, watching his 500 come apart with the calm of a man reading a dull report. The great lord of these lands. I raised my voice just enough to carry the length of the ice. Duke Ashford. I let the name settle. It is presumptuous of me, but will you grant me the time for a talk? For a long moment, the old man only looked at me down the length of that frozen serpent. Then he inclined his head, the smallest fraction of an inch, and I started up the bridge to meet him. The bridge held my weight like stone. Hazel came up it at my side, spent and stubborn. The broken man came behind, dragged along by the collar, breathing the Duke's name under his breath as if it were still a thing that could save him. The old lord did not dismount. Up close, he was older than his voice, gray, deep-lined, hard as a hitching post, and he studied me without a flicker. He named himself first, the way men of his rank do. Head of his house, 3 generations down from a prince, master of everything the eye could reach. Then he asked me, plainly, who I was to stand on his road and unmake his army. I am the Wolf King, I said. The words went down the ranks behind him, like a stone dropped in a still pond. An old title, an outlawed one, a thing their grandfathers had put down in blood and written out of the world. Even the Duke's stone face moved at it a little. His eyes went past me to Hazel. He marked the gold still fading off her arms, the shape of the skill she carried, and something in him settled into certainty. He granted it aloud, almost with respect, that the girl was true-blooded, a real descendant of the old Wolf King's line, and no story I had dressed up. Then he asked the question he thought would end the day. Did reviving a dead king's title mean I was raising the wolf people in rebellion against the crown? It was a good question. It was the one he needed me to say yes to. A rebellion he could crush inside the law, and no one would ever ask again what his soldiers had done in a hidden valley. No, I told him, this is not a rebellion. It cannot ever be one. He waited. Because under your own law, I said, beasts cannot rebel. I watched it land. In this country, the wolf people are not counted people. They are written down as beasts, classed as vermin, denied a person's name and a person's rights. And a beast that bites is not a rebel. It is only a beast. His whole army stood on this road under a paper that called the day's work vermin extermination, and he could not tear that paper up without tearing up the ground he was standing on. He took it better than most men would have. He granted the point. Yes, the sortie was written as extermination, and then he laid down the card he had been holding. His private soldiers, he said, the men he had sent on ahead, had gone into that valley and never come back. The wolf people had killed the Duke's own men, reason enough to burn them out, king or no king. There it was, the lie the whole war was built on. I had been waiting the length of the bridge to answer it. Bell, I said, and let it hang a beat. And 2 of his men are alive. They are held as prisoners in our village. They have been for some time now. The old man went very still. They are not dead. They are witnesses. I took a step nearer along the frost, and they will each say the same thing. Bell and his men loosed monsters into the wild and drove them at the hidden hollow to slaughter the wolf people and to leave it looking like a dungeon tide so that no name would ever be fixed to it. One of them ran west. She is written in your own ledger as missing, not killed. The other 3 are breathing, and they are ours. I let him do the arithmetic. I could see the moment he reached the bottom of it, because now he had only 2 doors, and both of them shut on him. Either the wolf people were dangerous enough to kill his hand-picked soldiers, in which case they were not vermin at all, they were people, and his extermination order was a crime. Or his soldiers were never killed, in which case the men who burned that valley wore his colors, and the only criminals on this road were his. He was quiet a long moment, the noise of his broken army small and far behind him. Then he told me, in the flat voice of a man closing a bad account, that he had underestimated me, and he asked at last what it was I actually wanted. What I wanted was small, and that was the whole trap of it. I did not want his head. A dead duke brings the crown down on you with the full weight of a nation, and I had a valley of 40 people to keep breathing, not a throne to storm. So I told him the plain truth, because the truth was the sharpest thing I owned. I wanted the extermination order gone, struck out, forgotten, as though the paper had never been written. I wanted the hidden hollow left off every map, It had already stayed off for 3 generations. I wanted his army turned around and walked back down the road it had come up, and I wanted the Duke to go home and find some quieter use for his ambition than a valley full of people the world had already thrown away. In exchange, the 4 living witnesses stayed in our keeping and stayed quiet. His men had burned a village to fake a monster tide. That was a rope long enough to hang a great house, and he knew whose hand was on the other end of it. As long as he left us alone, the rope stayed coiled. The day he moved against us again, it would find his neck. It was not justice. I want to be plain about that. The man who ordered a valley of the helpless burned to cover a lie rode away from that bridge with his title, his lands, and his life. And I let him, because a cornered enemy who owes you his darkest secret is worth more standing than dead. I had spent the whole war learning the difference between the debt you collect and the debt you keep in reserve. This one I would keep. The Duke understood the shape of it faster than his soldiers did. He looked at me a while longer, weighing, the same way he had once weighed a party of adventurers from a high seat, and turned his back on them without a word. Then he gave the order down the line. Stand down, turn about, home. The army did not cheer and did not argue. 500 men who had come to kill a village turned in the dust and walked back the way they had come, and the ice bridge stood over their heads the whole way, dripping in the noon sun, until the last of them had passed under it and gone. Beside me, Hazel let out a breath she must have been holding since Milford. The hidden hollow was safe, not for a day, for good, or as close to good as a thing like ours ever gets. I let the bridge melt when we were done with it, and I took my people home. Days later, when the dust had settled out of the air and the valley had gone back to the slow work of living, I stood on the rise above the hidden hollow and looked at what we had made. Water ran in the channels Angelina's golems had cut, dead straight, catching the sky. The patties held their bright squares of it. New frames stood where the burned houses had been, and cook smoke went up off them careless and unafraid, the way it never once had in 3 generations of hiding. The wolf people moved through all of it, old and young, flaxen and gray. No longer 40 frightened survivors, but a settlement, a place, a people with a roof and a name. Hazel was down among them, cleaned up and clothed and arguing with someone about nothing, her arm mended, her tail high. Angelina was already 3 sentences deep into some new scheme about a mill. They had a king now. That still sat strangely on me. I had spent my whole life as the man nobody looked at, the support in the back of the party, the one who carried the skills that kept everyone else alive and got the cold soup for it, the one they called too plain to matter and threw out of a dungeon to die, because a man like that is the easiest thing in the world to stop seeing. I had built my whole revenge out of exactly that, lending, waiting, letting the interest compound in the dark where no one ever thought to check. And here, at the end of it, the thing I had won was the opposite of the dark. These people saw me. The wolf elder who rasped his enemy's name as he burned had seen me. The girl who spent her own years to drag a stranger back from death had seen me. 40 people with every reason on earth to trust no one had looked at the man the world discarded and made him their king. Not for the power, though the power was real enough, but because he had come back for them when nobody ever comes back for anyone. The man they threw away was a king, and the throne was built out of everyone else the world had thrown away with him. That felt like the only kind of justice that had ever fit properly in my hand. Behind all of it, at the edge, the broken man still breathed, alive, in arrears, watching the height he could never climb again. Far to the west, a frightened woman carried her fragile new hope down a road I did not think I had seen the last of, and past the Duke, past his cornered house, past the quiet borders of these lands. There were larger powers still, older games, colder players, a whole country resting on a lie I had only just set a finger to the edge of. They would keep, they would come, in their own time, and I would be ready when they did. For now, the valley was green, and the smoke climbed straight up into a sky it no longer had to hide from, and the people the world had thrown away were home. I had spent my whole life as the man no one ever saw. That was over. They saw me now, all of them, and I had no intention of ever being invisible again.